show you right now.
The story of what happened May 25th, 2020 in Minneapolis, told today through the lens of eyewitnesses.
I believe I witnessed a murder.
Donald Williams was standing feet away from George Floyd as he was pinned under the knee of Derek Chauvin. After Floyd's seemingly unresponsive body was loaded into the ambulance that day, Williams called the police on the police he had just witnessed, in particular, Derek Chauvin. That 911 audio was played in court.
He just pretty much just killed this guy that wasn't resisting arrest.
Williams didn't feel he could talk to the officers at the scene.
Did you, believe that they were involved?
Yes, totally.
But the most contentious exchange of the trial so far,
Did you say that?
Is that what you heard?
was between Williams and Chauvin's attorney during cross-examination.
You called him a tough guy.
I did.
You called him a real man.
I did.
You called him such a man.
I did.
You called him bogus.
I did.
You called him a bum at least 13 times. Those terms grew more and more angry. Would you agree with that?
They grew more and more pleading for life.
The defense emphasizing a point it made during opening statements, that the perceived threat from a growing crowd caused Chauvin to direct his attention away from Floyd's care. The next witnesses appeared by audio only, since they were under 18 at the time of Floyd's death, including a 9-year-old and her now 18-year-old cousin, only identified as DF. She's the one who filmed the now infamous cell phone video seen around the world.
I see a man on the ground and I see a cop kneeling down on him.
She was asked to identify Derek Chauvin in court as the same officer she saw on the scene that day.
Are you able to tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury if you know who this man is? You can take your time.
Yes.
She said she felt threatened by the police there, including Chauvin that day, a day she can't let go of, even close to a year later.
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad, I look at my brothers. It's been nights I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting. But it's like, it's not what I should have done. It's what he should have done.
We lost Omar's shot there, but let's discuss as we wait for the trial to pick back up any moment. Joining us right now, Shan.
Understand that. The second one, however, is what I find
really good. Patricia, what did you think when Devin showed?
First of all, the headlines, the negative headlines came out after the New York Post did their piece. And the New York Post has never been a friend of black people. So they wrote these salacious headlines, took the book out of context, never read the book. And so the people who were saying negative things, they never read the book. They don't understand that the reason why I acknowledged heroin use or any other drug use was so America could see that the vast majority of the people who use drugs are middle class or upper class people who are like me, except most of them are white. But we think that the majority of drug users are poor, black, brown people. And that's just simply not the case. But that's where the war on drug targets. It targets those people who are poor, targets people who are black and brown. And so I was trying to ask the middle class, privileged white folks, get out of the closet about your drug use. Like me, if I was going to ask them to do something, I had to do it myself. Get out of the closet. In that way, we can have a more representative view of what a drug user look like. And that way, we can take some of the pressure off of the poor people who are catching hell for the very thing that all of these wealthy people are doing. Let's just be clear. The drug trade, the illicit drug trade, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. This industry could not be supported without middle-class, upper-class, privileged people. Let's be clear.
But do you consider yourself upper class and privileged? Obviously, you're African American, so we certainly, as I am, know the struggles. But with that said, the socioeconomics that you are speaking may have applied to you growing up in Miami. They don't apply to you now, although the dangers of being a black man certainly do.
Of course. You know, I came out of the closet because I know there's a risk. But if we think about all of our heroes, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, all of those people put their bodies on the line so that we could be free. The same is true here when we think about drugs. I'm trying to educate the public. I'm trying to show them where the real dangers are at. So when we think about a drug like heroin or any drug, particularly heroin, let's just talk about the opioids. The dangers lie in the fact that people don't know what they're taking. And in my book, I delineate, I tell people how we can change that by having these things called drug checking centers like they have in Switzerland, like they have in Spain, like they have in Portugal. They're not that expensive, and we could save lives. And I was
so
trying
is that
to tell
the
people
ultimate goal here? You believe this path that you are discussing openly, the goal is to save lives?
Absolutely, the goal is to save lives. When I think about my heroes, for example, I think about people like Prince, who died 5 years ago. From what I understand, Prince had what he thought was Percocet, which contains oxycodone, actually contained fentanyl because he didn't know what was in his substance. If we would have had drug checking facilities, he would have known what was in his pill. And that way he would have known not to take it or to take a much lower dose. There are so many Americans who are dying every year from this type of ignorance. And in my book, I'm advocating that we have these drug checking facilities so people can be informed. That's just one of the things that I'm advocating for.
We're going to talk to you more about the other things you're advocating for and the heat you've received in response. More with Dr. Hart after the break.
For all of us who work.
Drug. And then
it's going to run off. So a similar deal here. Flash flood watch is in effect for
to have these DBEs.
they're still on him, bro.
Yeah, bro. Are you serious?
Nobody
Bro, I really touched me like that, dude. I swear I
What's wrong? Why y'all still on him? He's not doing nothing to y'all.
You gonna let him keep his hand on his neck, bro? You're a bitch, bro. How? You gonna let him keep that like that? You gonna let him kill that man in front of you, bro? Huh?
Like what?
Bro, he's not even
Bro, no, that's not like.
bro. He's not even fucking mouth. Bro, you're not gonna help us, bro. Right. Bro, 97 years old, bro.
Nothing wrong. Y'all.
You gonna just sit there with your knee on his neck, bro. You a real man for that, bro. He ain't handcuffed, bro.
I'm a first responder from Minneapolis. The fact that you guys are checking his pulse and doing compressions if he needs that, you guys are on another level. Okay. Yeah, and I have your name tag, bitch. I don't fucking care. I'm not on call.
Don't touch me, bro. Don't touch me, bro. Don't touch me, bro. Don't touch me, bro. I'll fuck you up, bro. Don't ever touch me, bro. Like you bumpy, bro. You damn near dead, bro. He's fucking dead, bro. So you don't touch me, bro. I ain't got to worry the whole time I just think, bro, that's broken, Kyle. You know that, bro. You know that, Kyle. You know that, bro.
What's that badge number?
You know that's broken, Kyle. You know that's bogus, right, bro? Bro, you know it's bogus.
And then, Your Honor, we would publish to the jury Exhibit 25.
35, May 25, 2020.
911, what is the address of the emergency? Hello. I am on the block of 38 in Chicago, and I literally watched police officers not take a pulse and not do anything to save a man. And I am a first responder myself. And I literally have it on video camera. I just happened to be on a walk. So, this dude is being fucking children, so do you want to speak to the supervisor? I'm reporting this. I'm fucking reporting this right now. I'm willing to talk to agents about this. So if you need to talk to a supervisor right now, or if somebody needs to get in contact with me later on.
Let me get you over to the supervisor, okay? Hang on 1 second. 2033, 28, May 25, 2020.
Thank you, Your Honor. We would call Genevieve Hansen to the stand.
Balance of nature is the best fruit in...
Say it again?
Just to stand behind the chair.
Okay.
Please raise your hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth?
Sure.
Have a seat. And I think to be able to hear you more clearly, if you are comfortable in doing so, I'd ask that you remove your mask.
Okay.
And let's begin by you giving your full name, spelling each of your names, please.
My name is Genevieve Hansen, Genevieve. Last name Hansen, Hansen.
Thank you. Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Hansen, what's your current occupation? What do you do?
I'm a firefighter for Minneapolis.
That explains the uniform you're wearing today?
Correct, sir.
And how long have you been a firefighter for the city of Minneapolis?
It's about 2 years now.
And so, not a question I often like to ask women, but how old are you?
27.
Okay. There's a reason we asked that. The jury will figure that out later.
Okay.
So for about 2 years now, you've been a firefighter. And can you describe for the jurors, what you had to do to become a firefighter for the city of Minneapolis?
There's a hiring process, and once you're hired, we go through an EMT training. I am certified for the state and a national license. And then you go forward with firefighter licenses. That's a 4-month academy.
And so tell us, even before starting as a firefighter, did you have to learn some first aid type?
Yeah, it wasn't necessary to get on the job, but I had gone through an EMT program already, so I've gone through the course twice.
So when did you first do the EMT program?
I think it was sometime in 2017.
And so what was that program? How long was that?
It's called Pathways Academy, and it was a summer. It was just the majority of the summer. I went to a fire station and did my course.
And so that, do you remember how long that was? Was that 4 months, did you say?
Maybe about that. It wasn't every day, so it depends.
Nearly 2 weeks before tens of thousands of San Diego public school students can go back to school. Over the weekend, the first migrant children arrived.
You gonna just sit there with your knee on his neck, bro. You a real man for that, bro. He ain't handcuffed.
I'm a first responder from Minneapolis. The fact that you guys are checking his pulse and doing compressions if he needs that, you guys are on another level. Okay. Yeah, and I have your name tag, bitch. I don't fuck.
Me?
Basic life-saving things that we need to know for my job, or if you wanted to move forward with paramedics. I think it was like an 8-hour day or something.
And then you have some more hands-on training?
That was throughout the day. It would be kind of, and we had we did homework all night, every night for the whole time.
So how long was the Pathways Academy program altogether?
I think it was probably about 3 months or so. I can check.
So then after the, you have a day of classroom, what do you spend the rest of the time doing?
Studying.
What's that?
Studying.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so for then, there's some...
We did quite a few ride-alongs as well with, I did a couple of ride-alongs with paramedics and with fire.
So is this Pathways Academy affiliated with the fire department?
It's, I believe it's through the city of Minneapolis, just for trying to reach out to city youth within the city.
So this is a way of helping you get a job as a firefighter?
Yes.
Okay. And so then during that time, you're doing some ride-alongs, you're actually working with the fire department?
Mm-hmm. I actually had a cardiac arrest, our first call on my first ride-along. It's quite a sight.
And that was before you were even hired as a firefighter?
Before I was hired as a firefighter, before I was an EMT.
And so then, after Pathways Academy, did you have to take a test of some kind?
Yes, that's when I got my national registry test.
Conversation with him, and it certainly...
Is it?
Wash, which improves...
Look, the most emissions responsible mode that...
Into musicals, and what is...
Take or splinting, or, kind of covers all of that, and then the test is really scenario-based, like what are the first things you need to look at? What are the most important things that you need to address to have the best outcome for the patient?
So is it written, or is it...
both. You mean the written part, or it's fill in the blank.
And then, right, so
yeah.
It's some like written part, but is there also like showing you know how to do certain procedures?
Right, that's what I was explaining before, the hands-on portion.
Right, hands-on, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So that when you say both, it's a written test kind of, and as well as hands-on?
Separate days, yep.
And so you took that test at the end of the Pathways Academy program?
Yep, and at the end of, or in the middle of my academy for the fire department.
Complying with the demands of the teachers union for
But Sarah,
COVID
does the union,
precautions,
does the teachers union there, I apologize, I just want to be clear, does the teachers union there allow teachers who want to volunteer to help these kids to do so? Because if you're going to do that, can't you allow the same teachers to volunteer to help for in-person classes in the public school system in San Diego?
That is a great question, Neil. I think that is the central contradiction that is driving the outrage to all of this, because the schools in San Diego required modifications, and it required months of negotiations with this union that up until a few weeks ago was even treated...
A lot of times is to assist the medics, or we get there before the medics, and so we can, start any basic wound bandaging, or up to, starting compressions for full working CPR right away.
Does it also involve assessing a patient to determine what is needed?
Correct, that's the first thing we would do.
Okay. And then, so you're certified as an EMT, and I guess just for the record, what does EMT stand for?
Emergency medical technician.
And you got a national certification for that?
Yep, and a state.
And is that separate testing, or how does that work to get national and state?
Yeah, I believe it is separate testing, and then you have, we have continuous hours of education that for both.
And so, since your certification, you've had to continue taking classes to maintain the certification?
Yep, the fire department does continuing education all year round.
So then you, when you finished Pathways Academy, had you already been hired by the fire department, or did that come after?
That came after, about a year after it started the process.
And then once you got hired, is that when you obtained the state certification then?
I think I had both all along. The Pathways is why I have both.
Okay. So as part of this certification, you are able to do what we think of as CPR.
Right.
And that's, well, explain for the jurors what CPR is when we use that term.
So if we find no pulse, I would ask for medical, calling 911. I'd want an AED on scene, and I would start compressions. If I had my med bag, I would also be giving breaths. But if I didn't, just a rate of 100 compressions a minute.
And so CPR is the process of trying to resuscitate somebody, if I'm
we're looking to regain a heart rhythm.
And heart rhythm is another way of saying the pulse, essentially.
Correct.
Okay.
Mix shift happened between our consumables vertical.
Training in CPR before that even.
Yeah, I did Red Cross babysitting.
Work as a lifeguard ever?
Yes, I was a lifeguard.
Okay. So you got to know that kind of stuff then too.
Yeah, yep.
And that was...
I did that quite a few times in my youth.
You don't have people talking over each other?
I'm sorry, say it again?
Let's make sure we don't talk over each other.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know.
It makes it really hard to have a good record, so.
Got it.
All right.
Yeah, the court reporter has to take down everything we're saying, so we got to each wait to answer, wait for the question to be done. And I'll try to be better about that too. So, so when you start working for the fire department, explain if you would for the jury, when you go in for your shift, who are your coworkers, not who they are, but like how many people are at a fire station during a shift and how are they divided up?
Yeah, it depends on if you're at a single house or a double house, meaning is there just an engine there or is there an engine and a ladder? And on the engine we have 3 to 4, and on the truck we ride 4. So maybe 8 in a house, and if there's a chief there or not, we're all EMTs.
And so, as a firefighter, you mentioned earlier, I think, receiving separate training on fighting fires, right? I mean, that makes sense, right?
Very different jobs.
Yeah. And so in your 2 years as a firefighter, have you gone to fires?
Yeah, quite a few for somebody with as much time on it as I have.
And have you had to enter buildings that are on fire?
Yes, sir.
And provide, I guess, rescue for people who are in a building that's on fire?
Yes, I have pulled victims out of buildings.
And when you do that as a unit of 4 or however many other firefighters are there, you all work together on those types of calls?
Correct.
When you're, in your work as a firefighter, the title obviously makes us all think that you fight fires. But you do a lot more than that, correct? You have to say yes or no.
Yeah.
Thing to remember is the court reporter has to take it all down. So
oh, right, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, we don't often get a fire. I would say I mean, I've heard quite a few people give like a 90% medical for the calls, and that also depends on which station and which part of the city you're serving.
So, you know, whatever the specific number is, it's the great majority of your cases are medical, not fire.
Right.
And in those medical calls that you've been on since you started as a firefighter in Minneapolis, have there been times when you have had to provide resuscitation to someone who was pulseless?
Many times.
Have there been times when you have been on a call and you have had to assess a patient's condition and what they might need?
Many times. Majority of the time, we arrive before the paramedics, just based on how many fire stations there are in the city, and that's why we respond to medical calls, so we can assist them and or be there if they can't be immediately.
So incidentally, we've talked about.
And on the next hot bench.
Does that work? Yeah.
We'll keep you up to date on the weather with.
If they can, and calls in the middle of the night.
And then
even.
You get a weekend or something, or how?
I have 4 days off then after that. Mm-hmm.
So when you're, in your experience,
Mm-hmm.
How many times per shift would you say you have a medical call involving an unconscious or pulseless person?
It really depends on which station you're at. I'm at a particularly busy station, so it could be anywhere from, for pulseless, I'm in an area where there's a lot of overdosing, so anywhere from 1 to 5 times in a 24-hour period.
So dealing with a person who does not have a pulse is fairly common.
Yeah, correct.
I want to draw your attention to May 25th of 2020. So at that point, you had been working as a firefighter for a little over a year?
Mm-hmm.
Is that, yes?
Yes, sir.
And were you in the area of Cup Foods at 38th in Chicago?
Yes, sir.
And were you working that day?
No.
And, without telling us where you live, do you live in that area?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm in walking distance of that area.
Okay. And so on that date, in the early evening, just what were you out doing that you found yourself in that area?
I was going for a walk. I believe I worked the day before. So a lot of times you're just kind of tired, and I just wanted to sort of have a peaceful day. So I went on a walk and I sat in a little community garden on 38th for a while. And just thought it would be getting kind of dark soon, so I decided to take Chicago home rather than go through neighborhood streets.
Do you remember, were you on foot or in your car?
I was on foot.
And so you approached Cup Foods on Chicago?
Yes, sir.
And as you were approaching that area, did something catch your attention?
Mm-hmm. It's not uncommon to see, lights and think that, oh, my coworkers are there. So from a distance, I figured, it could have been anything. But I figured that a fire was there, so I started walking that direction, and as I got closer, there was a woman across the street screaming that they were killing him. So that's when I was alerted that the situation wasn't a basic medical call.
So at some point, did you walk
net worth that is more than, in some studies, the bottom 50%, I think we can ask them.
The situation wasn't a basic medical call.
So at some point, did you walk to the area where this woman was?
Yes, I actually asked her what was going on.
And then from there, did you notice some police cars in the area?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes, sir.
And did you then walk over to that area where the police cars were?
I walked.
Police car.
Yeah, I walked kind of in a big circle around the scene just to sort of start to have an idea what was actually going on. And
so you approached this police car where the incident was taking place?
Yeah, I came from behind the officers.
And I'm going to show you Exhibit 1 on the screen.
Okay.
It should come up on the screen right in front of you.
Okay.
Yes, sir, this has been admitted already. Do you see the photograph of Exhibit 1 in front of you?
Yes.
And you recognize this as the intersection of 38th and Chicago?
Yes.
And you'll notice in front of you, there should be a little stylus like this.
Okay.
And you can actually draw on the screen with that.
Okay.
And I'd ask you just to kind of draw on there for the jury, you know, your approach to this area and where you went until you went over by the squad car.
Okay. So the garden was on this side of the street. I'm not sure if I walked across or straight, but the woman that I first asked what was going on was just about here. So I made my way around, and I believe I came all the way around this way. And I was kind of watching what was going on here, and then I made my way around.
And then just for the benefit of the record, you're drawing that you were going westbound on 38th and then crossed over to the Dragon Walk side of 38th. That's where you crossed Chicago, then crossed 38th to near the Speedway store, and from there crossed over to the Cup Food side of Chicago.
Yes, sir.
All right. And John, can you erase it all in one fell swoop? And then, so what?
And we're taking care.
Welcome back. Time now.
Because I was concerned to see a handcuffed man who was not moving with officers with their whole body weight on his back, and a crowd that was stressed out.
And so we have previously admitted Exhibit 11, and this is a video taken from a camera across the street, and I'm going to show you a shortened version of Exhibit 11.
Mm-hmm.
All right? But yes?
Yes.
All right. And for the record, we are starting this at 8:25:20 approximately. So do you see that video on the screen?
Yes.
All right. And does this look like, you know, the area that we were talking about where you went and approached this
Yes.
scene that you described? All right. Now, I'm going to pause it right here.
Yes.
And looking at this, do you see this person I'm circling here?
That's myself.
Okay. And if everybody was seeing you approach from down here, correct? You came this way. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
All right. So you came from the bottom of the screen to this area, and you seem to be holding something in your hand. Do you recall what you were holding?
I didn't have anything but my phone, I believe. Or my keys.
And so what I'd like to do is let this run to show where you were during this incident, all right? So just keeping an eye on where you are
Okay.
and how you remained at the scene, all right?
Okay.
Now, if we can pause it right here, just for the record, it's at 8:26:29. We saw the camera moved a little bit, correct?
Mhm. Yes,
And so for a moment there, you were just off screen, correct?
correct,
And up until that point, you had essentially remained on the sidewalk, correct?
correct.
And so at that point, you stepped off the curb. How far from the curb did you go while you were off the screen?
I don't remember.
You didn't leave the area.
No.
And at that moment, you go back up onto the sidewalk. Do you remember why you went back up onto the sidewalk?
Because the officer controlling the scene was requesting that we stay on the sidewalk, demanding we stay on the sidewalk.
And if you could, just take the stylus and circle the officer that you're saying demanded you stay on the sidewalk. And for the record, Your Honor, the witness is drawing a circle around Officer Tao. And so when he asked you to go back up on the sidewalk, you did.
Yes, sir.
And at some point, you started a video recording with your phone, correct?
Yes.
And so we've already dealt with that, but at some point here, you actually start recording, correct?
Correct.
And Ms. Hanson, I'm sorry, I'm going to hold off on another question for now.
This really doesn't advance the who's image.
Well, there's no...
Yes, Your Honor, this has been admitted already.
Pandemic evolves.
Garden was on this side of the street. I'm not sure if I walked across or straight.
I'm going to ask that the video be paused here for the record at 8:30:25:26 to be more precise. The video has shown that the ambulance has left with Mr. Floyd and you're still standing there on the sidewalk, correct?
Correct.
So during that time period, after you first arrived, you went up on the sidewalk, there was just that one time that you left the sidewalk and went out into the street, correct?
Correct.
All right. When you first, did you observe the officers that were on top of the individual on the ground?
Yes.
Did you know any of those officers or recognize any of them?
Once I was all the way around, I recognized their Chauvin's face.
Okay. And where did you recognize it from?
It was a call probably the day before, or I believe it was the shift I had just worked.
But did you know him at all?
No, sir.
Did you talk to him on that previous call?
No, sir. I just noticed him because I had observed him on that previous call.
Did you know his name at that point in time?
No, sir.
All right. So what did you see about the officers there in relation to the body on the ground?
I noticed leaning, the officers were leaning over his body, and with them, it appeared to be the majority of their weight on Mr. Floyd.
And so how many officers did you see over Mr. Floyd?
In my memory, for whatever reason, I remember seeing 4 on his body, and we know now that that was 3.
So when you first walked up, you came around from that side, but then you had to go around to the other side on the curb, other side of the squad car, correct?
Correct.
All right. And when you saw that positioning of those officers, did that concern you?
Absolutely.
Why?
He wasn't moving and he was cuffed, and that's 3 grown men is a lot. Of putting all their weight on somebody is too much.
And did you notice where this officer you now noted, Mr. Chauvin, where he was putting his weight on Mr. Floyd?
His neck.
And incidentally, did you know the person laying on the ground, prone on the ground, who was handcuffed?
No, sir.
You subsequently learned his identity?
Correct.
And that individual?
He was not moving. His face was, the first thing that concerned me is his face was like smushed into the ground. Swollen, appearing swollen to me.
And, at that point, are you acting a little bit as Genevieve Hansen, EMT?
I identified myself right away because I noticed that he needed medical attention. It didn't take me long to realize that he had an altered level of consciousness, and in our training, that is when the first sign that somebody needs medical attention. So my attention moved from Mr. Floyd to how can I gain access to this patient and give him medical attention or direct the officers. And I didn't pay much attention to George Floyd after that.
So when you first got there and you saw Mr. Floyd on the ground, you mentioned about seeing his face, correct?
Correct.
And incidentally, I think in a subsequent interview you had talked about Mr. Floyd's face facing towards the speedway, correct?
Correct.
And
Which is just what my memory did, but we know that's not right.
And now as you sit here today, do you remember seeing his face when you were around to the squad car side of him?
Yes, sir.
And so in terms of, his face when you're first there, or even the rest of him, what is it that you saw that made you concerned about his medical needs?
I was really concerned about, I thought his face looked puffy and swollen, which would happen if you were putting a grown man's weight on someone's neck. I noticed some fluid coming from what looked like George Floyd's body, and in a lot of cases we see a patient release their bladder when they die. I can't tell you exactly where the fluid was coming from, but that's where my mind went.
The unvaccinated people to behave responsibly, take calculated.
I can't tell you exactly where the fluid was coming from, but that's where my mind went. He wasn't moving. He was being restrained, but he wasn't moving.
When you first arrived, was he vocalizing at all? Was he speaking at all?
I don't remember.
And earlier you used the term altered consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So yes?
Yes.
And what do you mean by that? What did you see in terms of his consciousness?
Well, we, when we're assessing on a level of consciousness on a call, we'll often first try to just talk to the patient and see if they respond. And if we don't get a response, we'll often kind of tap them on the shoulder or apply sort of painful stimuli. And often I would do a sternal rub or, you know, press their fingernail very hard. And if they respond to that, we know that, you know, we can assess their level of consciousness based on that. When somebody's laying on your, or, you know, leaning into your neck, that's painful stimuli.
So
I could tell that from the sidewalk.
Tell what?
That he had an altered level of consciousness to the point that he wasn't responding to painful stimuli.
You mentioned that Mr. Chauvin had a knee on Mr. Floyd's neck.
Correct.
Did you see where his other leg was?
I don't remember anymore, but I think I may have said something about it in previous.
Did you think it was on Mr. Floyd's back?
I don't know.
Okay. And in that moment, when you first arrived and observed what you could about Mr. Floyd, what did you think you needed to do?
I think I had already assessed that he had an altered level of consciousness. What I needed to know is whether or not he had a pulse anymore.
And, you know, I may back you up just a little bit here, but
I recognized that it was an issue right away because he seemed very comfortable. With
who was he?
Officer Chauvin.
Okay.
Seemed very comfortable with the majority of his weight balanced on top of Mr. Floyd's neck. In my memory, he had his hand in his pocket. He looked so comfortable.
And if his hand wasn't actually in his pocket, would that change anything that you obsessed at the time?
I suppose not. He was comfortable in the position that he was in.
So if his hand, instead of being in his pocket, was simply resting on his thigh, would that change any of your assessment?
He wasn't distributing the weight out and on the car, on the pavement.
When you first approached, you said you identified yourself as a firefighter.
Correct.
To whom did you identify yourself?
To Officer Tao, controlling the scene. I spoke loudly enough that I would think that the other three officers would have been able to hear me throughout the event.
We know you weren't, well, let me ask you this way, how did Officer Tao respond?
He said something along the lines of, if you really are a Minneapolis firefighter, you would know better than to get involved.
What did you think of that?
First, I was worried that he wasn't going to believe me and not let me help. And I also, that's not right. I mean, that's exactly what I should have done. There was no medical assistance on scene, and I got there and I could have given medical assistance. That's exactly what I should have done.
So based on your training and experience and what you had seen, what did you want to do for this person on the ground?
Had they let me into the scene, I already had decided what his level of consciousness was, so I would have requested additional help. I would have wanted someone to call 911 for the paramedics and fire to come. I would have asked someone to run to the gas station and look for an AED. And I would have checked his airway. I would have been worried about a spinal cord injury because he had so much weight on his neck. I would have opened his airway to check if there were any obstructions. And I would have checked for a pulse. And when I didn't find a pulse, if that was the case, I would have started compressions. And I didn't have my bed bag, so I would have continued compressions. We don't give mouth to mouth anymore. So I would have continued compressions.
What do you mean?
I would have put my hands, stacked my hands and pressed his chest.
Chest compressions.
Chest compressions.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what's the point of doing chest compressions?
Pumping the blood for somebody that's not doing that themselves, trying to get a pulse back.
And were you able to do that, any of those steps?
No, sir.
Why weren't you able to do any of that?
Because the officers didn't let me in to the scene. I also offered, in my memory, I offered to walk them through it, or told them, if he doesn't have a pulse, you need to start compressions, and that wasn't done either.
And so are these things that you wanted to do?
It's what I would have done for anybody.
And when you couldn't do that, how did that make you feel?
Totally distressed.
Were you frustrated?
Yes.
Ms. Hanson, as I told you, we can take our time, so feel.
The outcome. You can have a thriving economy and look out.
Ms. Hanson, as I told you, we can take our time, so feel free to just take a minute. If you need a drink of water, go ahead.
Okay.
While you were there, were there other people around you on the sidewalk?
Yes.
And were they saying things to the officers as well?
Yes.
And do you remember what kinds of things they were saying?
No, I was pretty focused on trying to get the officers to let me help.
And how were you doing that, trying to get the officers to focus on you and get help?
I think in my memory, I tried different tactics of calm and reasoning. I tried to be assertive. I pled and was desperate.
Did you also at some point start raising your voice?
Yes, sir.
And maybe used some foul language even?
Yes, sir.
Why?
because I was desperate to help, and I wasn't getting what I needed to do and gaining access.
And at some point, the voices of the other people around you, did you feel that sort of interfered with getting the officer's attention?
Yes.
So as you're doing that, were you able to pay more attention or any more attention to Mr. Floyd and his condition?
I wasn't really able to. I knew he needed help, so at that point it was just getting in there.
When you asked the officers to take his pulse, did you ever see them doing that?
No.
When you were over on the sidewalk at Officer Tao's direction, were you able to see the other two officers on Mr. Floyd?
From my memory, just kind of their heads.
So if at some point they may have checked a pulse, you may not have seen that either.
Correct.
All right. During this time, did you make any observations or notations of notes about Mr. Floyd's characteristics of his breathing? That was a terrible question. Do you want me to start over?
Yes.
Okay. During the incident, when you were there, did you make some observations of sort of the characteristics of Mr. Floyd's breathing that concerned you?
I don't remember anymore.
Okay. What is meant by the term agonal breathing or agonal breaths?
Agonal gasps we see in patients that are dying or pretty much dead. It's just kind of the body's. Forgive me, I don't quite know, but it's a sign of death.
And have you seen that in other calls when you've been working?
Yes.
And did you see something similar in Mr. Floyd?
I don't remember anymore, but I don't know.
Okay. Did not regain consciousness that you saw?
No.
And you stayed with him, or I'm sorry, you were there the entire time until he was loaded into the ambulance, correct?
Correct.
And at some point, you made, well, I guess the question is this. You didn't pay close attention to Mr. Floyd at some point because you knew he was unconscious.
Needing medical attention, there was no question.
And based on that, you focused more on trying to get the officers to allow you to help.
Correct.
At some point, did you start video recording your interaction?
Yes.
And with your phone, I assume?
Yes.
And why did you do that?
It was, I'm not sure why I chose to do it. It's an instinct.
And so you did record it?
Yes, sir.
And based on that, well, I guess I'll just ask it this way. At some point after the incident, you were interviewed by law enforcement officers.
The BCAs?
Correct, yes.
Yes, sir.
And you made that video available to them, correct?
Correct.
And why did you think it was important to record that?
Because memories of witnesses are never going to be as good as a video.
And so you wanted to have it to preserve.
It wasn't conscious, but I'm sure that's why anybody takes a video.
Yeah. And after recording that video, you stopped recording at some point, correct?
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, obviously you did stop at some point, right?
Well, yeah.
And eventually the ambulance took Mr. Floyd away.
Right.
And then earlier I said we'd come back to that moment in the previous video in Exhibit 11 when the ambulance left and you were still standing on the sidewalk there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
And we saw you just standing there. What's going through your mind as you're standing there?
I'm not sure. I think I probably was in disbelief.
And kind of in shock?
Yes.
And what, and at some point then, did you also make a 911 call?
Yes.
And it had to be sort of, I think distressing was the word you had used before. Did you have, when you're there and you're trying to help and couldn't, did you have a feeling of helplessness?
Absolutely.
Were you upset about that?
Yes.
Did you feel that, whatever the end result, you could have tried to help?
Sustained.
Well, why did you feel helpless?
Because there was a man being killed, and I would have, had I had access to a call similar to that, I would have been able to provide medical attention to the best of my abilities, and this human was denied that right.
And so from that point, we saw you standing there on the sidewalk, just sort of standing still.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And from there, did you stay in the area for a little while?
Yes.
And at some point, you made a 911 call.
Yes.
Why at that point did you call 911?
I think it all settled in that I wish I would have done that immediately, because it was ridiculous that fire station 17 was as close as it was, and that they hadn't been there. I should have called 911 immediately, but I didn't, and when things calmed down, I realized that I wanted them to know what was going on. I wanted to basically report it.
And so you made that call, correct?
Correct.
And a little bit more than a minute long. At some point, they wanted to transfer you to a supervisor, correct?
Correct. I asked for that.
And but then the call ends.
Okay.
Do you remember why the call ended at that point?
I don't know exactly, but there was kind of a lot going on. I was still worried about the witnesses on scene, particularly because they were people of color and black men. I was worried about their safety, and there were officers still on scene. But also, fire came, and it may have been that I ended the call because my co-workers were there and I could tell them what was going on.
So tell us about that. So at some point when you're there at the scene still, did a fire truck come?
Yes.
And they're coming to respond to the call? Correct?
They're coming to respond to the call, and they went into Cub Foods to actually look for a victim, which is unique for that, there to be that much miscommunication.
So let me ask you just a little different question. So when they came, those firefighters, did you know them?
I knew 2 of them.
And how many total came?
4. Driver, 2 firefighters, and a captain.
So the 2 that you knew, how did you know them?
Crossing paths at work.
So they knew who you were.
Yes.
So you knew that members of the fire department knew you were on scene as well.
Yes.
But off duty, of course.
Yes.
And so you had a conversation with them while they were there at Cup Foods?
Yes.
And you also had some conversations with other people who had stuck around afterwards?
Yes, and the driver and the other firefighter that weren't in the ambulance came back, and I also spoke to them.
Partying and spring break everywhere.
Firefighter that weren't in the ambulance came back, and I also spoke to them.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Nelson.
I have 1 minute to or something.
You may. Everybody can just stand, stretch in place if you like.
Did you also at some point start raising your voice?
Yes.
About who is the next, there used to be Tiger Asia, but...
Learn from each other.
Yeah, I'm learning every.
This is not about politics. You damn well know it's about politics, because fear equals control, and control equals power. Power is the very reason these reprobates got into this racket in the first place, and they're not going to let one sliver or soupçon of everything they've accumulated in the last year just wildly slip away. Oh, and to Brian's point, Joe Biden, since he didn't talk about COVID in the press conference last week, now he's talking about this to take attention away from the escalating crisis at the border. And literally one of the most despicable Democrats to ever represent the party, Andy Cuomo, who has done the worst job of any governor on top of killing.
We haven't heard from the defense. This is just one side, but very powerful testimony.
Yeah, let's listen in to the cross-examination from Derek Chauvin's defense attorneys.
Thank you for being here with us today. You testified that you've been a firefighter now for 2 years approximately?
Correct.
And I see you're wearing your uniform today?
Correct.
And that would be like your dress uniform or your Class A uniform?
Correct.
And that's common to wear when you testify in court?
Correct.
Fair to say that you were not wearing your Class A or any uniform on May 25th, 2020?
Correct, I was off duty.
Right. Okay. Being a firefighter is a stressful job?
Correct.
You testified about your experience as an EMT. We didn't talk much about your firefighter training.
Okay.
So you said you went through a 4-month academy, correct?
Correct.
And in that academy, I assume you learn like the basics of fire, right?
Correct.
Like different types of backdrafts and whatever.
Building construction.
Right. How to approach a fire, how to, where to aim the hose, I guess.
Yes, but fire is fire.
Right. So it's something, sometimes you probably got to come from the top down or from the bottom up, right?
Different always.
Right. And you learn about like going into a burning building, right?
Right.
Being safe, being cautious.
Right.
It's again, part of what you have to learn is how to deal with the stress of being a firefighter.
Right.
Do you either in the academy or in your continuing training, do you have trainings that focus on how to deal with the physical reaction to stress?
We do go over that in our trainings throughout the continuing ed. Also, I think you're suited or not for the job.
Sure. Takes a certain type of person to do the job,
Right.
But breathing becomes important, right?
Right.
You put on an oxygen tank, a mask.
Yep.
You've got to know how to breathe properly.
Controlling your breathing, right.
And sometimes you may go into a situation, it's not totally on fire and you may not have your mask on, you're running upstairs to save someone's life. Again, controlling your breathing.
Right.
And you learn about, have you ever heard the term tunnel vision as a part of fire training?
Not necessarily as a part of fire training, but I know what tunnel vision is.
So when you're stressed, you kind of focus on a particular thing.
Right.
Right? And it kind of changes your peripheral vision and you become hyper-focused, right?
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I'm assuming that sometimes you're not able to save everyone, right?
Correct.
And that there's a level of trauma that comes with that, right?
Sometimes.
Right. Depending on the circumstances.
Correct.
You also testified that you have both a national and state certification as an EMT, right?
Correct.
That stands for Emergency Medical Technician.
Correct.
That's basic first responder stuff, right? Medical training for first responders.
I believe that there's more basic. I mean, I think the police officers are not emergency medical technicians.
But then it's not as high as like a paramedic.
Correct.
So a paramedic has even more training than an EMT.
Yes.
Right. And obviously, maybe the CPR you learned to become a lifeguard was less intensive than what it took to become an EMT, right?
I took it much more seriously because I was practicing it and using it, but it's the same.
Yeah. But in your EMT training, you also learn like tourniquets and splinting and...
Right. Like I mentioned before.
Yep. All of these sort of assessment and emergency first responsive care.
Yep.
Okay. And you testified that because you've only been a firefighter for 2 years, you've been in several burning buildings.
Correct.
Now, have you ever been in a burning building or outside? Let's say you're outside. Let me ask you a hypothetical question. You're outside of a burning building and you're spraying the hose on the fire, right? Has anyone ever tried to come up to you and say you're doing it wrong?
No.
Do you think that, has anyone ever stopped to film you when you're fighting a fire?
Yes.
Okay. So you see someone, you're fighting the fire, and someone starts to film you. Does that, I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Try not to interrupt each other.
It's not conscious, but...
Yeah, it's...
I know. It's not a normal package, so we get it.
We all started talking at one time.
Okay.
So it's unusual, but I'm sorry, and I'll try to slow down too, right? So you're fighting a fire, right? And you may notice a citizen filming what you're doing.
Correct.
And that would not necessarily interfere with your ability to fight a fire,
No.
right? Have you ever had a citizen start to yell at you while you're fighting a fire?
No.
Do you think it would make your job fighting the fire harder if someone started yelling at you and telling you that you were doing it wrong?
I'm very confident in the training that I've been given, so I would not be concerned about somebody that was not trained to the extent I have been, and I would continue to fight the fire the way I would.
Right. But do you think it would be distracting?
No.
What if there were 12 people yelling at you and telling you that you were doing it wrong?
I think a burning structure in a city where there are buildings and homes and people living on either side is much more concerning than 20 people trying to tell me to do something different.
Right. But you wouldn't be distracted by that at all?
No.
What if they started calling you names?
Like I said, I know my job, and I would be confident in doing my job, and there's nothing anybody could say that would distract me.
Okay. So, what if they started to physically threaten you?
I'll repeat myself because I'm confident in my job and what I do and what needs to be done and my training, so I would continue to do that.
What is staging? What does it mean when a fire department stages at an incident?
It's always different, but we can stage to wait for someone to assess what's exactly going on and how we need to tackle that particular call.
So let's assume there's a call and the police are on scene at the call, right? And they
Sorry to interrupt. Are you talking about a medical call? We stage for different things.
Sure. Let's leave it as a medical call.
Okay.
And there's some trouble at the scene. Do you just come right into that emergency call, or does fire stage until police clear the scene?
We stage and wait for police to give code 4.
Code 4 means all clear.
Safe, yeah.
Right. So in a situation where there is trouble and the police are dealing with that trouble and they know they need a medical personnel to come into the scene,
Yeah.
medical won't come into the scene until it is called code 4, right?
Correct.
All right. And you said in your experience you've been on numerous calls throughout the 2 years you've been a firefighter, right?
Correct.
There have been calls that started out as call where the police responded first?
Correct.
So it's usually the police that are there first, they do some assessment, and they will call for medical.
Correct.
Have you ever been called to a scene where the police didn't call you? Meaning the police were present and they weren't the ones that called you?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. It's a little confusing. Police go to a scene, right? And whatever's happening at the scene, and they just don't ever call for medical, even though there's a medical situation.
Well, I wouldn't know because that means I wasn't called to it.
Precisely, right? So if you go to a scene, it's because you're responding to a call, right?
Correct.
And the reason that you're there is because the police call you.
If the police are on scene first.
Right, if the police are on the scene first. And so in a situation where you see someone having a medical emergency, right, wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that the police have already called for medics?
It would also be reasonable to assume that if the patient was cuffed
I'm going to ask you, I'm going to say objection non-responsive.
Wait for the question and then answer the question that is asked.
It's a yes or no question, ma'am. Is it reasonable to assume that if a patient is having a medical emergency and the police are present, that they have called for EMS?
Your question is unclear because you don't know my job, so can't answer.
Sure. So let's take this scene, right? May 25th, 2020. You walk upon a scene, you see someone having a medical emergency, right? You did not call 911 to get the medics there, right?
Right.
Would it have been reasonable to assume that medics had already been called based on what you saw when you first arrived?
Yes.
And in fact, paramedics did respond, right? You saw the ambulance come up.
Yes, that's not their normal response time.
Okay. And so you noticed there was some abnormal response time for medics.
Right, and I also noticed that that is precisely the kind of call that fire would respond to, and Station 17 is just a couple blocks away.
Okay. So do officers on scene decide, do we call for medic or fire?
I don't believe so. I believe that's dispatch. They call for medical.
So if
attention.
police call dispatch, and they say EMS, we need EMS code 3. It's dispatch who decides, do we send medics or fire?
Well, it would be it would be fire with medics, not just fire ever. I don't know the answer to that.
Fair enough. But ultimately, medics did arrive. Right?
Yeah, eventually.
And you have no frame of reference of when police called paramedics, do you?
No, but I know how long it takes for medics to get to calls typically, and I know how long it takes to drive 3 blocks in an emergency fire vehicle.
But that presumes that the fire vehicle was not on another call, right?
It would have been a different station that was, the nearest 2 other stations would have been able to respond to that call in 3 minutes.
So if you first walked on scene at 8:26:29, that was what we just saw.
Okay.
8:26:29.
Okay.
And paramedics had been called at 8:21. That's an abnormal response time based on your experience.
What time did you say I arrived?
8:26:29.
And the medics arrived at what time?
The medics were called at 8:21. Code 3.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that.
But again, you have no frame of reference, right? I mean, you've not seen any police reports, you've not looked at the CADs, you've not heard the 911 calls, you didn't listen to dispatch that night, did you?
That night? No, not that night.
Okay.
But that's totally abnormal.
All right.
And fire would have been added to that call because we go to calls like that all the time.
Right. And so it was abnormal, it would be completely and totally abnormal in your experience for it to take that long to get to the scene.
Absolutely.
All right. And are you familiar with the term load and go?
Yes.
And I believe you had a conversation with the BCA agents shortly after this incident, and you described what you observed as far as the paramedics doing was what's called a load and go, right?
Correct.
And that is essentially, as I understand it, paramedics arrive, something is amiss at the scene, so we put them into the ambulance and we move the ambulance to another
A safe location to address the needs.
And that's what you observed here, right?
Correct.
And it's because there were quite a few people, and those people were all fairly upset, right?
Correct.
And so, in your mind, as a paramedic with the experience that you have, as an EMT, I apologize, but as an EMT, you've done load and goes before?
We've done load and goes, yeah.
Right. And so, the reason that the medics did not commence, at least as far as you understood, commence resuscitative efforts for Mr. Floyd was because they were doing a load and go, get him away.
Correct.
Overruled. That's what you told the agents, right?
I don't remember exactly what I told the agents, but it looked like a load and go to me.
Okay. Now, in terms of your, again, personal experience, on that day, the paramedics drove off, and then at some other point, a couple minutes later, is when the fire truck arrives, right?
Right, and that's how I knew there was something wrong when requesting medical assistance.
Okay, because the fire department showed up at Cut Foods, and the ambulance had already left and gone to another location.
No, more because the fire, whether it's 17s or a different station, would have been able to respond to that call much sooner. than medics were.
So, you kind of formed that opinion on that day that there were some miscommunications between medics and fire and police.
Right, which, not to the fault of medics or fire. It's, we get a call and we go.
Okay.
So it was police and dispatch that miscommunication would have come in.
Okay. And again, that 5 or 6 minute delay is just unheard of in your experience.
Yes. Not by medics, but by fire specifically.
Are you trained as an EMT in the use of Narcan?
Yes, sir.
Can you explain what Narcan generally is?
It's an opioid reversal medication. We give it intranasally, but a lot of people on the street have a injectable form.
Kind of like an EpiPen almost, right?
Yeah, kind of.
You testified that the firehouse that you work at, you deal with a lot of overdose calls.
Correct.
And so you've had a lot of experience dealing with people who are overdosing.
Correct.
From opiates or from other controlled substances.
Correct.
And you have seen or dealt with many people who come out of an opiate overdose because of Narcan.
Correct. If I didn't have Narcan, though, we still give, we'll monitor a pulse and give compressions as necessary. I've never not had Narcan, but I would be able to give medical attention to somebody that had overdosed on an opioid and lost their pulse.
Okay, so let me ask you, is it fire department policy when you are going to a call of an overdose that police are also dispatched to that call?
I believe so, yeah.
And that is because when people are revived from that, they often become combative, right?
Not often.
I'm sorry?
Not often.
But it happens.
I've seen it happen.
Now I'm going to just kind of talk to you a little bit about your testimony about May 25th of 2020. You were out for a walk. It was your day off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Sorry. You're out for a walk, and you're walking westbound on 38th Street, and you see the lights, and you said it's not uncommon to see lights there?
In my neighborhood. Not on my corner, but in my neighborhood.
Okay.
Or in the city.
Right. Okay. And as you walked what would be the southeast corner of 38th in Chicago, you heard a woman yelling that they are killing you, right?
Right.
And so you did this kind of circle loop to visualize and see what was going on, right? And at the point that you came on scene, Mr. Floyd was already on the ground, right?
Correct.
And Mr. Floyd, you saw what your memory told you was 4 police officers on him, right?
Right.
But you now know that it was 3, right?
Right.
And I think you made some reference about why you videotaped, because our memories are fallible, right? And again, a stressful situation can impact your memory, right?
Absolutely. That's why we're lucky it was videotaped.
Right. It's also fair to as a Minneapolis firefighter, right? And Officer Tao asked you to step onto the curb, and you did that, right? And you would agree that when you first arrived on scene, your own personal, I'm just talking about you personally, your own personal demeanor was much more calm.
Correct.
And as you were there between 8:26 and 8:30, so in about those 4 minutes, you would agree that your own demeanor got louder and more frustrated and upset.
Frustrated, I'm not sure is the word I would use.
Angry?
More desperate.
You called the officers a bitch, right?
Yeah, I got quite angry after Mr. Floyd was loaded into the ambulance, and there was no point in trying to reason with them anymore because they had just killed somebody.
So in terms of the time that you were there, you have no idea what those officers were doing on the side of the car, right?
Saying the officers that I couldn't see from my vantage point, is that what you're asking?
Right. You don't know what they were doing.
I couldn't see the two junior officers, except for maybe like their shoulders up.
And so it's fair to say you don't know what they were doing.
Correct.
You don't know what they were talking about.
The two of them, no.
And there was, again, you described a fairly large crowd, 10, 12 people that were all in that general area. And several people were yelling, right?
Right.
And some people were yelling louder than others, right?
Right.
And a lot of people were saying things like, get off of him, right?
Right.
And a lot of people, you yourself were saying, I want to know what his pulse is.
Yeah.
Right? And some people were swearing.
Absolutely.
And would you describe other people's demeanors as upset or angry?
I don't know if you've seen anybody be killed, but it's upsetting.
The answer is...
Yes, I was just going to object, Your Honor.
Yeah, it's argumentative, and you can proceed.
I'm going to just ask you to answer my questions as I ask them to you, okay? I'm going to just ask you to answer my questions as I ask them to you, okay? You also talked about how when you first approached, you saw the complete and total body weight of all three officers on Mr. Floyd.
I never said all three officers. Their body weight was on him. The two in the back, their full body weight was seeming to be on him, but that's not something that would kill.
All right. But you testified that the
yes.
body weight,
yes, their body weight, yes,
was on.
Just answer his questions if you will.
So, just to be clear, for the record is clear, you testified.
Yes.
Let me finish my question.
Finish your question.
You testified that when you first arrived, you observed the weight of all three officers on Mr. Floyd. Yes or no?
Yes.
But again, once you were ushered or commanded or directed, whatever term you want to use, to the curb, you again, as far as the other two officers, you were not watching who had their weight, where, or what.
Correct. I could not see the other two officers. I could see them, and they were not talking much. I could see their faces.
A lot of people were yelling.
Right.
And again, you were not paying attention to what they were saying.
Just here and there.
So do you remember what the officers were talking about?
Oh, the officers? No, I have no idea. They weren't talking.
All right. You also testified that as you were observing Mr. Chauvin on George Floyd, that you formed the opinion that Mr. Chauvin's hand was in his pocket.
Correct.
And you described him as comfortable.
Correct.
Coming from Mr. Floyd's body, and you assigned that, or you believed that to be urine.
I considered that it was, and took that as a sign.
Do you recall telling the agents that it was his urine?
I don't recall.
And you said that, you testified that your focus became really sort of zoomed in on trying to get the attention of the officers, right?
Not the attention so much as trying to reason with them and gain access to get medical attention.
And you testified that you believed that the other voices, the voices of other people, interfered with you getting their attention.
I was worried about it, but I know that Tao could hear me talking because he was responding to me directly.
Now, in terms of your the statement that you gave, you were interviewed by Agents Lund, Matthew Lund, and Agent James Ryerson. Do you recall those names?
No.
Do you dispute me if I'm
No.
telling? And would you dispute me if I told you that that interview took place on May 28th of 2020?
No.
And before coming into court, did you have an opportunity to review your statement at all?
I had the opportunity to, but I didn't.
Okay. You never read the transcript of your statement or anything?
I chose not to.
I just want to ask you a few questions. You said that Officer Tao at some point said if you're really a firefighter, you should know better.
Correct.
Have you been to other scenes where people are trying to interfere with police officers doing their jobs?
No, not really. Not that I can recall.
Do you remember telling the agents that you believed that Officer Chauvin had his hands in his pocket?
Vaguely remember saying that.
Do you recall telling the agents that you were pretty certain the fluid was coming from Mr. Floyd's body, and that's what made you think he was dead?
I'm sure I said that. Pretty sure.
Do you recall describing the crowd as a heavy crowd?
No, I don't recall.
Would it refresh your recollection to review the transcript of your statement?
I don't want to.
Would you dispute me if I told you that you told the agents it was a heavy crowd?
No, I guess not.
Do you recall after paramedics took Mr. Floyd and then you had a conversation with the firefighters that arrived, how you described the physical appearance of Mr. Floyd?
I don't recall.
You recall telling them that he...
I don't want to argue it. What's your ground? Sustained. You may impeach.
All right. I know you don't want to look at your transcript, but may I approach the witness? I'm just going to ask you to read the underlying questions in your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you describe Mr. Floyd as a small, slim man?
Overruled.
Yeah, it appeared to, with 3 grown men on top of somebody, it appeared that he was small and frail.
Okay.
But I know that's not to be
there's
true,
no question.
obviously. I was finishing my answer.
Please, courtroom, counsel remain. Witness remain.
What you've been watching is the testimony and then cross-examination by Derek Chauvin's defense attorneys of Genevieve Hansen. She's an EMT who arrived on the scene. She testified, quote, there was a man being killed, clearly growing frustrated with attempts to undermine her credibility.
You will not argue with the court. You will not argue with counsel. They have the right to ask questions. Your job is to answer them.
I was finishing my answer.
I will determine when your answer is done.
Okay, well.
And so, do not argue with the court. Do not argue with counsel. Answer the questions. Do not volunteer information that is not requested. The attorneys for the state have redirect. They can ask you questions if they think that certain things were left out.
Okay.
It is counsel's prerogative to ask you leading questions and for you to answer those and not volunteer additional information. Are we clear on this?
Okay.
Thank you. Come back tomorrow at 9:30.
All right.
Do we have the person with the cell phone? Could we arrange to have that person come down? Somebody from the state can have access to that person? If you could have that person come in.
I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. We've been watching CNN's continuous live coverage of the trial of Derek Chauvin, and we just heard very emotional, very powerful testimony from an off-duty firefighter describing in very vivid and heartbreaking detail what she saw at the scene of George Floyd's death. So far, multiple witnesses on this day, they have offered very compelling, very consistent accounts of Floyd's final moments there on the ground. One man telling the court he felt like he was witnessing a murder. Other witnesses revealing that Chauvin seemed to kneel on Floyd's neck even harder and harder as onlookers begged him to simply stop. Chauvin's defense team insists he was distracted by the crowd. Let's get right to our senior national correspondent, Sarah Sanger. She's covering this trial for us in Minneapolis. Sarah, the testimony from today's witnesses, and we just heard very, very painful, emotional testimony from this off-duty police firefighter, I should say. It paints a disturbing picture of Chauvin's actions during the final minutes of George Floyd's life.
Not only a disturbing picture, but an incredibly clear picture. The witnesses that we have heard from today, including Genevieve Hansen, who was the EMT and firefighter, who happened to walk by the scene. She happened to see these officers on top of George Floyd, and she saw Derek Chauvin in particular on George Floyd's neck with his knee pressing down. And you could hear how frustrated she was because of her training, because she is a trained EMT. She said she was looking at George Floyd's face, and that it looked swollen, and that his face looked like it was pressed very hard into the ground, and she felt that something needed to happen. She felt like he was coming to the end of life, and the fact that she was unable to do anything because the police were not letting her near George Floyd, even though she was asking them again and again, did you check his pulse? Did you check his pulse? Did you check his pulse? And every time she asked, when they didn't do it, she got more and more frustrated, angry, as she said, watching this play out because she felt helpless, and she had the training to try and help if the police would have just let her try and help. So you could hear her frustration on the stand, and then she is cross-examined by Chauvin's attorney, who starts to question her training, which she clearly did not like, and question whether she remembered what she really remembered or not. And she kind of said, look, at least there's video, so at least somebody, thank goodness somebody was taking video. But there was an admonishment at the very end there from the judge, because there was a bit of combativeness between her and Chauvin's attorney, who was asking her questions about whether she was upset, for example, seeing what was happening to George Floyd, and she says, well, he was dying, so wouldn't you be upset? They were killing him. The judge admonishing her, telling her that she just has to answer the questions, that it is their right to ask the questions, but clearly her testimony was incredibly powerful, not only because of what she said, but she is sitting there in her uniform. She is obviously a professional. She is obviously an EMT and a firefighter. She had all the answers to her training, and that is going to have a huge impact, I imagine, on this jury. Well,
yeah, at one point she said that she saw what she was seeing on the ground there. She saw a man. She said, there's a man being killed. She said, I wanted to help. Then she said, this human was denied that kind of help. And then later she said, they had just killed somebody. I don't know if you've ever seen somebody being killed, but it's upsetting. She was very, very strong in making those comments. And at one point, we all saw her break down. She had to wipe away tears.
Yeah, and we've seen that over and over and over again today, Wolf. She, again, you can't help but imagine the ripple effects of not only the world saw this, right? These are individuals who were there in person watching this happen and feeling helpless. And you saw her tear up, break down on the stand. And this is a person who deals with difficult situations, medical situations on a regular basis. But this particular situation really struck her, and that is going to also strike the jury. She called 911, and she told the 911 dispatch that they are killing someone, that the police are killing someone. That is going to resonate. It resonates with those who are watching the trial outside, and it certainly is going to resonate with those who are sitting there, the 14 jurors, 12 jurors, and 2 alternates, watching this play out. But she was just one of several people who had incredibly vivid, emotional, strong testimony for the prosecution today.
Well, very powerful witnesses, very emotional. You're absolutely right, Sarah. Stay with us. I want to bring in CNN political commentator Bakari Sellers. She's an attorney. Natalie Jackson, a wrongful death attorney, is also with us. Bakari, tell us what you thought at the end of this dramatic exchange that this witness, Genevieve Clara Hansen, this off-duty firefighter, had with the defense attorney, Eric Nelson. We heard the judge, Peter Cahill. He was upset. He was angry at her. Explain that.
Well, I think that you saw the witness become somewhat unraveled as the testimony went through. A lot of it has to do with the fact that this is very emotional. A lot of it has to do with the fact that the cross-examination, sometimes it just gets on your nerves. But you begin to see that at the end, and she was being impeached. What you saw was the fact that she had made a statement to law enforcement officers, and her testimony wasn't consistent with that statement, which is why the defense attorney went up to the podium, asked did she want to read her statement. He asked her multiple times to go back and actually say what you stated to law enforcement, because it is not what you're testifying to in court. That's when you saw the combativeness, when she was being impeached. I thought that she had some great moments today. I thought that she was very emotional today. She talked about the fact that it was very difficult seeing someone being murdered. But the fact is, she was there to talk about they wouldn't let, or law enforcement wouldn't let her give him care. And the defense did a good job of bringing out the fact that they had already called EMTs, whether or not she believed it or not, or the timestamps will have to show. But I thought that she became unraveled as this went on, and the jury in the room saw that. Now, there are going to be a lot of points, a lot of people keeping score, saying, oh my gosh, she did this, she did that. But you have to look at the totality of this. This is just one witness, and I thought that the other witnesses today were really, really good. The young ladies who were there who were watching, the young girl, my heart broke, the young man who was testifying earlier today, and he talked about them trying to make him angry. He was just open and honest. But I thought you saw her unravel as we got near the end when she was being impeached by the defense.
Yeah, that's an important point. You know, Natalie, what did you make of the line of questioning we heard from the defense attorney? The argument seems to be that the officers were distracted, they claim, by people trying to help George Floyd.
Well, I think that that's the wrong road to go down. I think that, you know, what his argument is that people who were trying to save someone from being killed were distracting the killer. And I'm not sure that is a good argument to make. And to go back to Genevieve Hanson, I thought she was very effective. She's the only witness that is on their level. She's a public servant just like them. She has a duty to the public to protect and serve just like them. I feel that her being angry about this situation and imputing that anger onto the defense attorney because he's the closest thing to Darren Chavez, that to me really kind of, I think that will resolve, that will really stick to the jury, and the fact that, you know, she felt this was wrong. She felt that Derek Chauvin actually killed George Floyd, and she said it.
And the fact is that she herself, and this is pretty extraordinary, on the scene, made a 911 call herself, right, Natalie?
Yes, that's extraordinary. What we've seen is exactly what the prosecution has promised. We've seen people being brought to the stand who call the police on the police. Every one of these witnesses, which is pretty extraordinary to me. And you've seen this bouquet of humanity.
On the month of shakes.
It's an important time.
Felt they could have and should have done more. And Chauvin and his defense team are acting like he did nothing that was wrong by not trying to do anything. And in fact, they try to say that he was intimidated by a crowd that never approached him, never threatened him, and was only pleading with him to do more like these other citizens did. And I do not know how a jury's going to look at it, but I think the nation is looking at, what are you talking about? Everybody wanted to help. All these people were doing, even Williams, who cursed you out, was saying, do something, man. The man is dying. And you're the only one on the scene, you and the other officers, that didn't want to do more to help the man. I don't think that will do well for them. Whether or not it will impact the jury, we'll see. But I don't see how anyone could have heard these testimonies today and not say, why didn't the police have the same spirit that I need to do something to help this guy?
Well, and Rip, to that point, I mean, the testimony of a trained EMT, Genevieve Hanson, that we've been listening to, and then the cross-examination. The cross-examination seems to be going at her motive. Why did she want to help? She wasn't in uniform. What are you wearing? Why are you wearing that? Are you wearing that there? Who cares what she's wearing? She was a trained medical professional who thought she saw someone dying. Do you understand the defense's strategy of trying to knock out her testimony?
I do. I think the strategy is that he has no way of explaining this, so he's reaching for straws. I think there is no narrative that makes sense. So when the facts don't support you, you smear the witness, you smear the victim, because the facts make no sense. How do you make sense out of any of this? To play a tape and show people saying, man, he's dying, man, do something, and the other officer chooses to block their view and say, I'm scared. If he was so scared, why was he blocking their view and mocking them? But they're trying to tell you something that you're not looking at. They're pointing at this when they're showing you something else. And I think that they have no real legal strategy. Their hope is to try on the technicality of the law. In my opinion, is get one or two jurors to say that I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and hang the jury. But if so far we're not hearing a defense that is cohesive and in many ways coherent.
Correct.
You don't know what they were talking about.
The two of them, no.
You know, the opportunity for dough is getting a little stale, I think.
And follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, and
On the girl who was 17 years old, the one that took the viral video that the entire world saw, when you heard her struggling in her everyday life, wondering if she could have done more for George Floyd. If that did not break somebody's heart, I don't know what would. That was incredibly compelling. It told you about the deep humanity of this young person who recognized that something was absolutely wrong. And yet, the police officers, who are grown men, did not see the same thing. That is hard to believe, that they couldn't see what a young person was seeing. And then we heard from a 9-year-old girl who said it made her sad and it made her mad what she was seeing. Words from a child's mouth were as clear and as powerful as the adult who spoke. And smartly, the defense did not cross-examine that child, because what can you say to a child when she is simply telling you that she knew what she saw was bad, that it made her sad and mad? Those are the things that stood out to me today, and I think those are the things that will stand out to the jury at this point in time, Wolf.
Yeah, seeing the video over and over again, but hearing the eyewitness accounts, especially from those young people, it was heartbreaking to know that for the rest of their lives, they're going to question themselves, wonder, did they do enough to try to save this man's life? Everybody stand by, or we're only beginning our special coverage here in the situation.
To join Planet Fitness?
That order. However, the South Dakota High School Activities Association told us in a statement, as written, the executive order does not task the SDHSAA with anything. Which brings up the question, are these orders enforceable?
It is not a law, but they're directing officials who are responsible to the governor to do things. So local school boards aren't responsible to their...
Hey, but
A Border Patrol official confirms today that the migrant facility in Donna, Texas, near the Mexico border, is incredibly overcrowded. And the numbers?
Thank you all so much. The Beat with Ari Melber starts right now. Hi, Ari.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much. Welcome to The Beat. I am Ari Melber. We begin as well with breaking news. This is day 2 in the murder trial for the officer who killed George Floyd, and it just wrapped up. If you've been watching MSNBC, you saw they just finished a lengthy day. The story was witness after witness today taking the stand and at times delivering emotional testimony under oath, including the person who shot the now infamous video capturing that killing on tape for the world to see. Some of the witnesses, we should note, were minors. Those witnesses do not appear on camera.
I believe I witnessed a murder.
I was sad and kind of mad. Looked like he was shoving his meat in his neck. I felt like there wasn't really anything I could do as a bystander. The highest power was there, and I felt like I was feeling it.
It was emotional. This is what happens in trials. The people who were witnesses or otherwise involved, in a sense, relive things for the jury. What makes testimony probative and often powerful is that it be, of course, true, or as close to the truth as possible, and often that it be human, that the jury can relate to it. Now, this jury will decide Officer Chauvin's fate. Heard all of that and more. We just showed you, of course, just some brief point.
For 15 days. The legal limit is just 72 hours.
What bogs us down is the fact that we're having to take care of 1,200 kids that are already...
Whether or not he had a pulse anymore.
Genevieve Hansen is an EMT and was off duty on a walk when she ended up feet.
At 29 miles an hour in Rapid City. It's cool out there too, by the way, 38 degrees. The peak wind gusts, 38 within the past hour.
What is Mexico?
Yes.
25, 35, about 45 degrees colder today than at this time yesterday. Here are our temperatures.
His mom, he was in pain. It seemed like he knew. It seemed like he knew it was over for him. He was terrified. He was suffering. This was a cry for help.
He seemed like he knew it was over for him. Unlike most trials, unlike most issues of justice in America, there is some common evidence here because so many people watch that video. As I mentioned, the fact that this is being relived is how it is supposed to work in our justice system because people are very literally bearing witness for this jury to ultimately decide an individual's fate. And that same testimony became quite emotional as she recounted again. This is her bearing witness. This is her testimony, or this is what she experienced that she's telling the jurors. They'll decide what to make of it. But she recounted something very personal. How she says under oath, all of this had her thinking and feeling that Mr. Floyd, as he lay there being killed, as he lay there dying, could have been her father.
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad, I look at my brothers, I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all black. I look at that and I look at how that could have been one of them. It's been nights I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting and not saving his life.
A witness recounting their experience and, as she put it, her own subjective personal feeling of responsibility or guilt. We begin with our experts tonight, NYU law professor Melissa Murray and civil rights attorney David Henderson.
All Mexicans, 9 men, 3 women, coming up a trail. Under former President Trump's pandemic protection law.
Apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting. But it's like, it's not what I should have done. It's what he should have done.
And a separate underage and unidentified witness acknowledged she may have seen officers check for George Floyd's pulse multiple times, but doesn't think they found it. We ended the day in the middle of the testimony from that EMT that you heard from, so that's where we're expecting to pick things back up tomorrow when court gets back in session. All is part of trying to establish the record of what happened and why from those closest to what happened.
Truly dramatic testimony today. Omar, stay with us. We're also getting new reaction to the second day of critical testimony in the trial of the former police officer, Derek Chauvin. Jurors heard multiple witnesses describe what they saw. Let's talk to the lead attorney right now for the Floyd family, Ben Crump, who's joining us. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. Difficult day for everyone watching this powerful, emotional testimony. First of all, what's your reaction? What did you make of the testimony we heard today from several witnesses who saw all this unfold firsthand?
Wolf, it was heart-wrenching, simply heart-wrenching. You know, we've all seen the video, but they saw it up close and personal, a human being being tortured to death, with Derek Chauvin not offering him any consideration, any respect, any humanity. I mean, what you heard from that little girl and Darnella and Mr. Williams and Miss Hampton was their heart speaking. Anybody with a heart would have felt compelled to say something, to say you can't do this. But Derek Chauvin didn't seem to have a heart when he kept his knee on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And the only question now that remains to most of us is, does America have a heart to make sure that there's justice for George Floyd?
And if you look at the video, you can't ignore the fact that the other police officers, Ben, who were there, they did basically nothing to stop him from kneeling for more than, 9 minutes, almost 10 minutes on George Floyd's neck.
Exactly. Well, they aided and abetted in the crime. The fact that they did not follow their training, their professionalism to say, hey, our job is to protect life. not to take life. Our job is to help people, not to torture people. But why wasn't that same level of professionalism and respect given to this unarmed black man who was face down in handcuffs, who was begging, Wolf, was begging, saying, I can't breathe. He begged for breath 28 times. And that EMT worker, you heard her testimony saying that she could tell he had lost consciousness. She just wanted to know if he had a pulse, could we try to save him?
Yeah, Genevieve Clara Hansen, the Minneapolis firefighter, off duty at the time, she specifically said there is a man being killed. She pleaded, she wanted to do something to help, but they wouldn't let her. So far, we've heard from 3 witnesses, and this is pretty amazing, who actually called the police on the police. They made 911 calls, including, as you correctly point out, Donald Williams, who felt he had witnessed what he described as a murder. So what does that tell you then?
Well, it tells me that a lot of times marginalized people of color, we don't know who to call when the police continue to engage in excessive use of force and brutality against us. Because certainly George Floyd wasn't the only time that a black person has been tortured or brutalized in America by the police. We're just fortunate that it was captured on video so everybody wouldn't just accept the police narrative. That those bystanders had video to show this torture video that now has been seen over 50 million times on the internet and probably more on television shows like yours. And what it says to us is that the most watched video of an American citizen being killed by the police in history. Will there be accountability?
As you were watching, we were watching, everyone was watching the witnesses today. They said that Chauvin, the former police officer, appeared to kneel harder and harder on George Floyd as people from the outside actually tried to intervene, that Chauvin refused to get off of George Floyd even after that ambulance arrived. Can the defense argue that Chauvin was still concerned for his own safety when Floyd was totally unresponsive, for nearly 4 minutes at that point?
And Wolf, that's why I continue to say when I hear a lot of analysts come on television and say, oh, this is a hard case, this is a difficult case. This murder case is not hard. When you watch that torture video of George Floyd, the fact that Derek Chauvin, put his hand in his pocket, and Reverend Al and the family of George Floyd, we kneeled yesterday for a symbolic 8 minutes and 46 seconds, what we thought was the amount of time that Derek Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's neck. And when we were down there, it became very challenging and at times painful. So what that told us is that you had to be intentional in what you were doing. You couldn't hold that position unless you intended to. And I would pray, if I was prosecuting the case, I would ask the jury in my summation, get on one knee and let's time it for 9 minutes and 29 seconds and tell me that that is not intent for you to stay in that position.
What did you think?
The book is out today, and there's been such a great response, and I think people are looking for encouragement. These women are faithful and courageous, and listen, they had to lean on their faith. They didn't always have that at their fingertips, that courage.
I couldn't really do anything physically what I wanted to do because the highest power was there at the time.
So we went through a process.
David,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, we went through a process where we saw the lawyers picking a jury. And one of the things that it's easy to forget is the jury also has to pick a lawyer. It's easy to forget, but a lot of these jurors said they hadn't seen this video before, so they certainly have no idea what to expect from these witnesses who are going to testify. You're still in the phase where each side is trying to build credibility. The worst thing you can do during that part of the trial is overstate something or misrepresent what to expect. The fact that all of these witnesses were so polite, so respectful, so easy to believe, strongly cuts against the way the defense has played their cards so far.
Yeah, a fair point, and what I was just going to get at was, although there's more than one way to interpret things, I will say that in all fairness, the fact that the defense didn't even try to do anything with some of these witnesses who were minors, I think speaks to the fact that they knew it was a bad day for them, but they also were strategic enough to know that trying to fact check or rebut what appeared to be quite credible, honest testimony, so heartfelt from these, I will say, brave young people would have made their day worse for their defendant, and they just sort of took that in. It was a striking day. We'll be covering this as thoroughly and fairly as we can. We'll be coming back.
And another passenger for 3 days in orbit this fall. Pretty cool. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.
Nella, the young lady who filmed the video that went viral, how she is suffering from PTSD over the guilt of saying, I wish I could have did more. And it's so unfair to people like Darnella and George Floyd family to be suffering this post-traumatic stress disorder of watching this horrific terror that was exhibited upon George, and that the police officers continue to say, we did nothing wrong. How could you? How can you still come and tell the public, tell America, tell the world, we did nothing wrong when we kept our knee on his neck and literally killed this man? Where is the humanity? Mr. Williams had humanity so much that when he watched a fish suffocate and die for lack of oxygen, that he said he had to get out the house and clear his head, get some air. But then to watch a human being, Wolf, die from deprivation of oxygen right before your very eyes, it is something that will haunt them for the rest of their lives, as it is haunting all of America and all the world who saw that video for the rest of our lives. If you watch the George Floyd video, you would never be able to unsee that video.
Yeah, but as you correctly point out, Ben, it's one thing to watch the video, which we've all seen, millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people around the world have seen the video. But it's another thing if you're a young person and you're physically on the scene and you see what's going on, you can only imagine how powerful that is. My heart went out to all those young people who were testifying today because it's going to stay with them forever. They're going to keep asking, maybe I could have done this, maybe I could have done that. Let me ask you,
to speak to that patient or caller?
She says people in customer service have a chance to make or break someone's day.
That's correct. There will not be any surgery that day.
And she's made it her mission to make sure her conversations are always a bright spot for patients.
We're actually given an allowance, a daily allowance here to make someone's day. So.
And a low pressure system is like a real deep valley, especially in this case. So the air flows from the high to the low, and that's why we have so much wind out there.
Workflow.
Attract new customers. In the Northwest, and that's really dropped our temperatures down. We're 44 degrees colder right now than at this time yesterday, and Brookings 36 degrees colder in Sioux Falls. The difference is not so bad out west because they had already had the cold front.
This terror, this torture, and watching a man die, if this police officer is not held accountable, what message would they send to, what message would that send to her and the future generations about whether we value black life in America?
Your thoughts also, I have you, Ben, on the judge in this case, Peter Cahill. He did have a rather tense moment at the very end. You saw it, we all saw it today when he actually admonished that firefighter for the way she was interacting with the defense attorney. What was your reaction to that? You're an attorney.
Well, I think the court has a duty to maintain that everything is fair for both sides and try to make sure that there's impartiality and to do things appropriate to make sure that there's due process extended to everybody. And so we respect that. However, the same way the court, the prosecutors, the defense, and the entire system would have treated George Floyd if the roles were reversed, then we expect that same thing to happen in this situation. And what I see oftentimes, Wolf, when black people and marginalized people of color are charged or accused of crimes in America, there's a degree of righteous indignation when they start to argue why they should be convicted and held accountable. Well, I pray that people who are watching this trial will say, we need to have righteous indignation and righteous anger at what Derek Chauvin did in killing an unarmed man. We cannot let this be the precedence of equal justice in America. We have to stand up and say, we're better than this, America. We cannot allow this to bring us down from our highest ideals that every American citizen should be afforded equality and justice.
Ben Crump is the lead attorney for the...
Debt became the size of our economy.
Democrats going beyond conventional infrastructure.
Every road we fix, every bridge we build, we can either do it in a way that's better for the climate or worse for the climate.
The Democrats' plan also addresses social inequities.
We need this plan to also fight systemic racism, protect public health, and drastically cut down on climate pollution.
Republicans accuse Democrats of touting liberal policy goals under the customarily bipartisan guise of an infrastructure bill.
It is a Trojan horse under the auspices of new roads and bridges.
President Biden intends for the bill to raise taxes.
He also believes that there's more that can be done to make the corporate tax code fair.
The corporate tax rate would likely jump to 28%, and Democrats would wipe out the Trump tax cuts, restoring the old top individual rate to nearly 40% for those earning more than $400,000 a year.
Whether you tax it or borrow it, you're now going to dictate how it gets used in the economy.
Democrats
to prevent it from happening. And so we stand in solidarity with our Asian American brothers and sisters. There's legislation that is being led by Congresswoman Grace Meng that I believe we will move through the House, and Leader Schumer has indicated is going to be moved through the Senate to help push back against this rise in hate crimes, enable reporting to take place, make sure that resources are directed to the appropriate authorities so we can end this scourge once and for all. I certainly am disturbed at the fact that there were individuals who saw this unfold and didn't do anything. We just have to be better as New Yorkers and as Americans.
Yeah, that part is that straightforward. We have been covering the Chauvin trial earlier in the program. Your thoughts on it here on day two?
Well, what happened to, George Floyd was a high-tech lynching. It was a cold-blooded murder. It unfolded in front of the American people. It led to a necessary awakening of the fact that we've got to deal with the scourge of police violence, police brutality, and excessive use of police force. That's not to say that the majority of officers, certainly who I interact with, are hard-working individuals who are in the community to protect and serve. But we have a problem. The video illustrates that. We need accountability in this trial, but we also need to move the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act through the Senate, get it to the president's desk. Congresswoman Karen Bass is doing a great job in making sure that we address the overall issue while we demand justice in this particular case for George Floyd.
Yeah, I hear you on all of that. So many serious things, sir, and yet we try to juggle more than one at a time. Can I ask you one music question before I let you go?
Certainly.
You have been publicly associated, and proudly so, with Bed-Stuy's native son, Biggie Smalls. Have you seen the new Netflix documentary yet?
I have seen it. It is amazing. I think that it provided a level of insight into his growth and development into the artist that he became that I was even familiar with, and I grew up in the neighborhood.
It's general, just lots of sunshine coming down all across the KELO region. Just couldn't warm up thanks to that northwest breeze just drawing more cold air in. 43 degrees right now. That's as warm as we've been all day long in Sioux Falls. West wind at 28. We've had some gusts in the past hour, up around 40.
Closed captioning brought you.
So we're going way east now, actually over to Valley Springs, where, believe it or not, there is only one house on the market. I'm not even sure if that house is still on the market. So clearly they need more.
And debunk the regime's malign behavior.
I remember that feeling of being.
We'll take it this far.
Hey, now I'm in the limelight. See you soon, Congressman. Appreciate it. Up ahead, we have a lot more in the program. President Obama's own pandemic expert, who actually helped end smallpox in India, makes his beat debut. We're excited for that. I'm going to explain why. But before we get there, there's breaking news. We just got this into the newsroom. It's a New York Times report. Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz under DOJ investigation. The reporter who broke the story will tell you why. New next.
Voted into very much headway was made at all, and I think that to this point, clearly the prosecution is driving that point home.
Reva, your thoughts? Another big day for the prosecution, or did the defense score some points?
Yeah, I'm gonna end this day with agreement with Joey. He's gonna love it. I agree with him wholeheartedly. Big day for the prosecution. Even though I think that witness was a little too combative. Got to keep your eye on the prize in a trial. You're not going to win a trial in one day. This is not a sprint. It's a marathon, and it's important for everyone involved in the trial to understand that process. But I do think there was some incredibly compelling testimony. Having those children testify, those mothers, those aunts, those cousins on that juror, thinking about their own 9-year-old having to give testimony in a case like that's going to be incredibly powerful for them. I think the prosecution goes home again today feeling like they made big points, and they come back tomorrow and they put more points up on the board, and that's how you get a conviction in a case like this.
Misty, the time's winding down on us, but does the testimony of a 9-year-old stick with you?
Of course it does. To think about a 9-year-old on the stand, and to think about a 9-year-old actually witnessing that occur is truly heart-wrenching, and there's no question that the jury is not thinking about that as they go into tomorrow's testimony.
All right, again, thanks to our expert panel, best in the business, Joey Jackson, Areva Martin, Misty Maris, Darren Porcher, of course, Gene Casares, Joseph Scott Morgan, our thanks to them as well. This case, as to the points made by our panel, just getting started, an emotional day 2. Day 3 coming up. We're going to have it for you here on HLN. Gavel to gavel coverage beginning at 10 a.m. Genevieve Hansen back on the stand for more fireworks. We'll see you then.
Pizza. Pizza's Cooking Kitchen and Specialty.
Cannot imagine. I mean, Wolf, we have to take a step back and think about the fact that this woman, regardless of what her job was, witnessed a man being murdered. You have a 9-year-old, you have a 17-year-old, you have these witnesses who were there who witnessed a man being murdered, and so you hear that passion in their voice. That passion is going to resonate with jurors, and what the defense is trying to do is point out any moment where they can, where there is an inconsistent statement, where there is a lie, for lack of a better term, and try to use that to damage the credibility of the witness on the stand. And then the judge will give the jury instructions at the end, and they'll say you have to weigh the credibility of each witness that came before you. And I just think, I personally think that her passion, and I personally think that her testimony is going to outweigh the impeachment. But that impeachment is still there, and something that the prosecution is going to have to deal with.
It was a very powerful testimony that she provided. Captain Johnson, several of the witnesses felt they testified, and they're all under oath, that the former police officer, Derek Chauvin, he kneeled harder, they said, harder and harder on George Floyd's neck when they tried to intervene. How could that potentially shape this case, if at all?
I think it has an impact. I think it shows intent. As we watch videos, it does appear that he's twisting when you look at the back of his foot. And so, did the crowd make him angry? And so I think it does have an impact. I think when you listen to all the witnesses, they all kind of gave similar statements in a different way. And so to me, that brings a little truth to what they saw.
You know, the whole notion of that one witness, Donald Williams, Captain, suggesting that he had no choice but to call the police on the police. You heard what he said. How does that build this case for the prosecution?
Well, I said that was powerful. He said it. Also, the dispatcher, the firefighter, and I think it shows that at that moment, the police officers that were on the scene, all of them, they had no faith in speaking with them and no faith in reporting what they had saw. And so I think they called the power that they saw was there and called the authority. And so I think we haven't seen that in our country. And I think we saw it from the dispatcher. And so I think it is powerful that these people thought we're going to step over that normal line and go above what is expected and call the police on the police. And so we haven't seen that, but I think it's powerful. And I think hopefully that is a changing moment in our country.
You know the law, Mary Moriarty, in Hennepin County. What did you make of the decision to hear from minors today, one as young as only 9 years old, who were clearly so impacted, so affected by what they saw?
My guess is one of the reasons that the state called all those youthful witnesses is that they had made a motion for an aggravated sentence, and you need the jury to find aggravating factors, and that would be the presence of minors. So for instance, the 9-year-old who wore the green shirt that said love on it, she didn't have a lot to offer, but certainly her presence there talking about what this meant to her, as well as the other youthful witnesses, was really compelling. And if Chauvin is convicted, the state will be asking for an aggravated sentence. And you can bet that the state is going to talk about the impact that this had on each one of these witnesses.
You know,
Tonight, the powerful, emotional testimony in the murder trial of Derek Chauvin. Witnesses as young as 9 years old paint a painful picture of what happened to George Floyd. Witnesses describe what they saw as Floyd died, and we hear from the teenager who recorded the video that shocked the world.
It's been night. I stayed up, apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more.
Bracing for a fourth wave, cases and hospitalizations on the rise, including among children. Plus the good news, vaccine hesitancy is decreasing with more than 2.4 million shots a day. Graphic video, a brutal attack on an Asian American woman in New York City as the Justice Department takes steps to stop a growing wave of hate crimes. Nearly $3 trillion infrastructure plan. What's in it and who President Biden wants to raise taxes on to pay for it. Inside the child migrant crisis, CBS News goes into a Texas Border Patrol facility built to hold only 250, now filled with more than 4,000. Final salute to a fallen hero. The emotional memorial service for a Boulder police officer, Eric Talley, one of 10 people killed in last week's supermarket massacre. Nationwide pet food recall, what you need to know to keep your dogs and cats safe.
Wealthiest Americans and on corporations. New images coming in tonight from the southern border. For the first time, the Biden administration allowing a press camera inside the overcrowded Donna, Texas facility. Children on mats, shoulder to shoulder. And the statement tonight from the Secretary of Homeland Security. NATO scrambling jets 10 times across Europe to track and intercept Russian military planes. Here at home, several wildfires burning near Mount Rushmore. Hundreds of homes evacuated tonight. The SpaceX rocket exploding during a test flight. And news from the NFL tonight, next season will look a lot different and more trouble for Major the Dog at the White House.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here on a Tuesday night. Those troubling new numbers on the coronavirus here in the U.S., what authorities are seeing in more than 20 states now, and the reason why, they say. But we are going to begin tonight with the searing new testimony in the trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin in the death of George Floyd. The young witnesses today, one just 9 years old, 3 teenagers taking the stand too. Darnella Frazier, 17 at the time, there that day with her 9-year-old cousin. The two of them walking by the officers, pinning George Floyd down. Darnella Frazier turning back, capturing that video now seen around the world. She told jurors today she has stayed up nights apologizing to George Floyd for not doing what saved his life. The 9-year-old witness, and the moment in court today, Derek Chauvin took off his mask so she could identify him. And late today, the fire department EMT, Genevieve Hansen, off duty that day, also a witness, she offered to help. She is seen on the left here in a sweatshirt on an officer's body camera. Testifying today, she repeatedly called for them to check George Floyd's pulse. The defense cross-examining her just moments ago in ABC's Alex Perez, leading us off from Minneapolis tonight.
In court today, the jury hearing from the teenage girl who recorded the video that sparked international outrage, capturing George Floyd's final moments. Darnella Frazier was 17 then. You can see her here walking to the corner store with her 9-year-old cousin. The judge allowing her to testify off camera as she described how she saw what was happening and ushered the child into that store.
Was there anything about the scene that you didn't want your cousin to see?
Yes.
And what was that?
A man terrified, scared, begging for his life.
Frazier, seen here, standing by the wall, recording as now former police officer Derek Chauvin pinned Floyd down with a knee on his neck.
I heard George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe, please get off of me. I can't breathe." He cried for his mom. He was in pain. It seemed like he knew. It seemed like he knew it was over for him.
The experience forever seared into her memory.
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad. I look at my brothers. I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all black. I look at how that could have been one of them. It's been nights. I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more.
The jury then hearing from her 9-year-old cousin, who identified Chauvin when he stood up and removed his mask.
So is that the person then you saw?
Yes.
The girl testifying Chauvin kept his knee on Floyd's neck even after the paramedics arrived.
They asked him nicely to get off of him.
And when they asked him nicely to get off of him, what did he do?
He still stayed on him.
The prosecution then calling 2 other teenaged eyewitnesses, Kaylin Gilbert and her friend Alyssa Funari, who testified that as Floyd grew weaker, Chauvin applied even more pressure on his neck.
At one point, I saw him put more and more weight onto him.
And how could you tell that?
I saw his back foot or leg lift off the ground and his hands go in his pocket.
The jury then hearing from Minneapolis firefighter Genevieve Hansen, who happened upon the scene and begged officers to take Floyd's pulse.
Get off the street! He's not responsive right now. He's not responsive right now, bro.
Hansen then calling 911 herself.
I literally watched police officers not take a pulse and not do anything to save a man. And I am a first responder myself.
When you couldn't do that, how did that make you feel?
Totally distressed.
Were you frustrated?
Yes.
Donald Williams, who was standing next to her that day, also called 911.
He just pretty much just killed this guy that wasn't resisting arrest. He had his knee on the dude's neck the whole time.
Defense attorney Eric Nelson argues the police officers saw the crowd of onlookers as a threat, but he did not force the issue with the teenage girls who testified today. He did aggressively question Williams about his words to Chauvin.
You called him bogus.
I did.
You called him a bum at least 13 times.
That's what you count in the video?
That's what I counted.
And that's what you got, 13.
Those terms grew more and more angry. Would you agree with that?
They grew more and more pleading for life.
The cross-examination there of Donald Williams. Alex Perez with us from Minneapolis. And Alex, I know the defense attorney also cross-examining that firefighter, Genevieve Hansen, asking her as well about the crowd gathered at the scene, shouting at the police officers.
Yeah, David, the firefighter responded to the defense by saying, "I don't know if you've ever seen anyone be killed. It's upsetting." She clearly was frustrated. The entire cross-examination was tense. The judge in the end telling her she must answer the questions asked of her. She's due back on the witness stand tomorrow morning. David?
All right, Alex Perez leads off again tonight. Out.
Right here in LA County has administered more than 269,000 doses in about a month and a half. And as more vaccine becomes available, a new poll shows more Americans are willing to get the shot, most notably the black community. As many as 55% polled say they want to get vaccinated, and that's up 14 points since February. Nora?
CBS's Omar Villafranca, thank you. Tonight, police in New York City are investigating another brutal assault on an Asian American woman. A new survey finds 1 in 4 Asian Americans have experienced a hate incident. And we want to tell you about this warning. The video of this latest attack is disturbing. Here's CBS's Nancy Chen.
Tonight, new video shows the violent attack on a 65-year-old Asian American woman in New York. A man pushes the woman to the ground and repeatedly kicks her in broad daylight. From another angle, building staff members watch the attack. One closes the door, both now suspended.
Absolutely disgusting and outrageous video of an Asian woman being attacked by someone full of hate.
Tonight, the woman's still in the hospital. The NYPD searching for the suspect. This just the latest in a string of violent attacks on Asian Americans across the country. More than 3,700 hate incidents reported since the start of the pandemic, leading to protesters rallying across the country demanding change.
Our community is feeling that fear, is feeling that sense of dread about even going outside. And no American, no person should be made to feel that way.
Representative Andy Kim tweeted about his 5-year-old son's experience with bullying, writing that another kid called him Chinese boy. My son, confused, told the boy, "I'm a New Jersey boy."
I know that it's not the last time he's going to have this kind of encounter of racism. I want to find a way to prepare him. And that's what I was trying to convey in that post is how do we talk about this? How do we share this? How do we prepare ourselves for this?
Despite Dr. Walensky's pleas to stay vigilant, some states are moving ahead with plans to reopen or relax restrictions as the U.S. accelerates the pace of vaccinations.
Her job is to speak the truth, even if people don't like it.
At least 2 southern states, Alabama and Arkansas, will drop mask mandates in the coming days, even after President Biden urged them not to.
Please, this is not politics. Reinstate the mandate if you let it down.
To me, a mask feels like a very small price to pay to protect people's lives, to save people's lives.
Now, Wolf, there's also about 24 countries, in addition to the European Union and the World Health Organization, that are wanting to form some kind of international treaty to basically have a better preparedness for the next pandemic if one comes. And of course, health experts have said that is potentially likely. But right now, the Biden administration says the U.S. does not plan to enter into those talks or those negotiations because they said they do not believe the timing right now is appropriate.
Caitlin, thank you very much. Caitlin Collins reporting from the White House.
Small businesses and communities all across South Dakota. In the community of Faulkton, there is a fundraiser looking to create a way to help.
And it's already raised more than $500,000 along with connecting people across the country. Cooper Seamer explains.
The pot continues to grow for the Faulkton Area Foundation's Chase the Ace fundraiser, capping off a 6-year effort to get funds back into the community.
The fundraiser began early last year, right as the pandemic set in. Foundation President Troy Hadrick says they had to start looking at other ways to play as businesses temporarily closed.
Then when COVID hit last year and a lot of those were shut down for a while, we kind of had to figure out what we could do or were we going to have to stop for a while. And ultimately, we figured out ways that we could take payment online.
Anyone 18 and older living in the United States can buy a ticket for $5. Each week, the foundation draws a ticket, and that person has a chance to draw for the Ace of Spades and win half the total pot. Hadrick says the amount they've raised so far will help complete the new community fund.
To be able to know that from here on out, we're going to have this pool of money that earns interest and creates those earnings, and then we can give that away to the community for all sorts of different projects. I think it just really lets you continue to dream.
Many of those looking to
% in New York City.
We've often been viewed as invisible and as foreigners. People need to understand that Asian Americans are just as American as anyone else.
The victim is in the hospital with serious injuries. The president today announcing a plan to combat violence against Asian Americans, including establishing a new Department of Justice initiative and a new committee focused on ending xenophobia, part of the COVID-19 Equity Task Force. David?
And we will stay on this. Eva Pilgrim, thank you. Meantime, President Biden also making news tonight, set to announce a sweeping new infrastructure plan to rebuild roads and bridges across this country and to build stronger internet service for rural America, among other things, potentially creating millions of jobs, paying for it by proposing to raise taxes on the wealthiest Americans and on corporations. But he will face a fight. And here's our senior White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, tonight.
President Biden's new jobs and infrastructure plan is massively ambitious and expensive. The price tag expected to range between $2 to $3 trillion. The goal to jolt the economy by rebuilding the nation's roads, rails, and bridges. But Biden wants to go well beyond that, calling for investments in broadband access, electric systems, and manufacturing. By one estimate, it could create 2.3 million jobs by 2024. To pay for it all, new tax hikes. The White House today saying the president has a plan to pay for every dollar.
He's proposing a way to pay for his proposals over time.
Biden says he'll raise taxes on large corporations and the most wealthy, but promises no one making less than $400,000 a year will see their taxes go up. Also on the table, raising the corporate rate from 21 to 28% and imposing new penalties on corporations that move jobs overseas.
But Mary, you and I know the same reality, a 50-50 Senate and the president expected to face resistance from Republicans on this.
He absolutely is, David. Republicans are already pushing back against any attempt to raise taxes. But even some Democrats are voicing concerns about this plan. The bottom line tonight, Washington is gearing up for a bruising fight. David?
Mary Bruce live at the White House. Thank you, Mary. Meantime, tonight, the first time a journalist's camera was allowed into that crowded facility at the southern border in Donna, Texas. Nearly 18,000 unaccompanied minors now in U.S. custody. Those new images from inside tonight, one pool camera, as it's called, let in for the first time to share with the rest of the media. Children screened and processed by Border Patrol before they are sent to shelters run by Health and Human Services. Tonight here, the statement from the Secretary of Homeland Security on what we're now seeing. ABC's Rachel Scott on the border tonight.
Tonight, inside the severely overcrowded Border Patrol facility in Donna, Texas, where migrant children and teens are being held. Rows of kids, packed shoulder to shoulder, laying on mats under foil blankets. The children separated into 8 pods, up to 600 in each. No room to move inside. One little girl wiping tears from her eyes through a plastic divider. This facility is only meant to hold 250 during the pandemic, but there were more than 4,100 people here, and some 3,400 are minors.
Our facilities were never designed to hold people for longer than a couple of days, much less 8 or 9 days, which we've seen on occasions.
And outside today, hundreds more waiting to get in. Benches crowded with children. Others ushered along in a single file line. This is the first time the Biden administration has allowed a press camera inside this facility.
Morning, guys.
And just miles away, Border Patrol coming across one group of migrants after another. This mother carrying a 2-month-old baby. Emotional, saying she came from Guatemala fleeing poverty and violence. Authorities are finding up to 400 children a day. And roughly 18,000 are already in U.S. custody, a near record.
Every facility we have along the southwest border is over capacity right now. Just yesterday, we had over 10,000 people in Border Patrol custody. That's much higher, especially under COVID constraints, than any facility should have.
And David, you saw those images of the overcrowding in the facility behind me already. Several dozen migrants have tested positive for COVID-19. Tonight, the Department of Homeland Security is responding. Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas saying that the Border Patrol facilities are no place for children. He said they are making progress, but that it is going to take time. And tonight, he's reiterating the administration's message that the border is closed. But David, I can tell you, we've been out there at the border and migrants are still crossing, David.
Rachel Scott live in Texas tonight. Rachel, thank you. Overseas tonight, late word today, NATO's
Giving, we're giving our all.
That means all sales, all day.
Donated to great local causes.
So, Joe.
Traditional in one thing, I've been married for 52 years to another person who went to high school with your mother and me, and very happily married. So if you can find a good one, keep them.
All right. That's a foundation, the building block. We're almost out of time. You said you wanted to say something about the tie you have?
Yeah. What tie am I wearing?
I haven't seen it in person. I'm looking at the screen here. I'm going to guess it's a Jerry Garcia tie where they adapted some of his late in life paintings into ties. That'd be my guess.
Can you see it?
Hey, Jay Garcia, we see it.
Again, Harry Melber. Thank you for having me.
Favorite Jerry quote?
Sometimes, let's see, sometimes the light's all shining on me. Other times I can barely see.
Lately it occurs to me, what a long, strange trip it's been. Amen. Dr. Brilliant, thank you. I hope you come back. This was your debut. And I will tell my mom you said hi. All right, we got to fit in a break. We have a lot more in the program, including this new evidence I'm going to tell you about and why bail is back in the news. Stay with us.
It doesn't.
Hundreds of people have been forced from their homes. More than 2,100 acres have burned. Nearby Mount Rushmore is closed. There's a nationwide recall of dog and cat food tonight. The FDA says the company Midwestern Pet Foods is voluntarily recalling batches from 10 brands of pet food because of possible salmonella contamination. There have been no illnesses or deaths reported, but earlier this year, the same company recalled several products after they were linked to the deaths of more than 100 pets. We have posted a recall list at CBSNews.com. And there's big news tonight from the NFL. The season will be extended by one game to 17 regular season games per team. The last game will be played against teams from opposing conferences. All right, coming up next, students get a lesson in civil rights history by embodying the heroes of the movement.
If you can't watch the CBS Evening News, you can listen. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sponsored by TD Ameritrade.
So who climbs ladders to clean their gutters?
Requiring now that if you vote out of precinct with a provisional ballot, that ballot is invalidated and cannot be counted. That is a change in the Georgia law. It also further restricts early voting. It allows challenges to any voter. That challenges their legitimacy to participate in the political process. It is open season on voting, and it is all done, Wolf, with no record that substantiates the need for these draconian measures.
So, Sherilyn, how confident are you in this case?
Well, this bill is such an overreach that while I am normally quite sober, I feel very strongly that if we have a chance to get to trial, we will prevail in this case. We actually were very involved over the course of the weeks that these bills were going back and forth, and so we're intimately aware of how these measures were rammed through, how no record was.
With a news bureau just minutes from the state capitol, Dakota News Now has politics covered.
Holding the powerful accountable, asking the tough questions.
Dakota News Now. It's news, but you want it.
An exciting announcement from Hy-Vee Sanford Legends. Officials today revealing the 8 celebrity athletes who will be visiting for this year's event. Those athletes include Rod Woodson, former Twins first baseman Paul Molitor, and 4-time Olympic gold medalist Tamika Catchings. The sports clinics will have limited capacities this summer, so participants are encouraged to register in advance. You can do that at legendsforkids.com. The 2021 Hy-Vee Sanford Legends runs June 10th.
Today.
Thanks, Peter. All of you to come and be part of Jersey Mud.
Major League Baseball has a 108-page health and safety book.
This one.
NBC's Steve Patterson went to spring training in Arizona to find out if teams are ready to play some ball.
It's back. It's therapeutic. I think we've all needed it, not just players and coaches, staff,
but also front office and the fans. I mean, hearing the crack of the bat, the sounds and the smells of baseball, it's always been a big part of recovery, whether it was war in the past or economic issues, or in this case, a pandemic or 9/11. We need this. It's a nice way to turn the page and get back to normalcy.
He's right. Coming up on NBC Nightly News, the new rules teams must follow, plus what MLB says about players and the vaccine.
Mother Nature certainly hit us with a breaking ball over the inside part of the plate with this weather. Mr. Roney explains his first alert forecast when we return.
Dakota News have occurred, as have certain cancers, including lymphoma, and tears in the stomach or intestines, and changes in lab.
Payments for 18. Let's take number one. Let's advance.
You know this because you were there. Related package that doesn't pay for the transportation with a gas tax or vehicle miles tax. Clearly, they shrank from anything that would touch people, ordinary people who make less than 400K, but that diminishes its climate impact.
Yeah, you saw Transportation Secretary Buttigieg talk about that, but then it was kind of shot down, it seemed, in all corners up on Capitol Hill. All right, when we come back, tomorrow's headlines tonight.
Jail before trial.
I had a very close encounter where I thought I was going to die. I did not know if I was going to make it to the end of that day alive. Wednesday was an extremely traumatizing event.
When this defendant was arrested, he was wearing a Trump t-shirt that said, "I was there," with the date January 6th. This is from new court documents. He also confessed to bringing a gun to the Capitol. It could have been so much worse. Now, prosecutors are arguing that he should be stuck in jail before trial. They also note that he threatened to hang a Capitol police officer after all of this, the one who allegedly shot a rioter, posting, "He will swing. I had a rope in my bag on that day." Now this defendant wants to be out walking the streets before trial. Or take the infamous zip tie guy, Eric Munchell, holding plastic restraints, armed with a stun gun. Prosecutors say he was ready to do real kidnapping as part of a conspiracy. And he's out. He's not incarcerated right now. He's just on home confinement before trial. These are specific examples that show there is not equal justice here. Dangerous rioters, proven to break laws, proven to have intent to harm, released on bail, while there's a persistent racial bias in the system. And the data shows that black and brown defendants accused of far less or no violence are still more likely to be jailed before trial than white defendants. This is a story we have covered in many different ways, and we will continue to measure and track it. When you hear about systemic racism, when you keep an eye on police brutality cases, which of course the nation's been watching this week, or other less visible but still insidious mechanisms, you see the facts. White indicted terrorists, that's the government's words, walking the streets, while black and brown people who aren't even accused of violence sit in jail before trial. We'll stay on these stories, and we'll get back.
Optimizes your car insurance, so you only pay.
I got milk.
70s return finally by Friday, and for the entire Easter weekend, even getting back to 80 on Easter Sunday.
Not too bad at all, Tyler. We appreciate it. Thanks for joining us here on KDLT. NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt is up next.
Kelsey Passo joins me in 2 minutes for the 6 o'clock edition of Dakota News Now over on KSFY. From all of us to all of you, good night from Courthouse Square.
Winter is full of surprises, but you'll be ready with a Ford Escape.
To urine, rash, itching, confusion, memory problems, muscle pain or weakness, joint pain, flushing, or fever. These are not
From a computer.
Who climbs ladders to clean their gutters?
Doug.
Hey, Limu.
How great is it that we get to tell everybody how Liberty Mutual customizes your car insurance, so you only pay for what you need? I mean, sorry. Whoops. Meow, good evening. Meow. Nope. Oh, what? I'm an emu. No, buddy, it's a filter. Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Introducing.
In Wayman's tape confession, his version differed from the eyewitnesses.
I was panicking. A little bit. You make up excuse.
Of them
are children. About 2,000 of them have been at the facility for more than 72 hours. That is way over the legal limit. 39 of them, children, have been there for more than 15 days. That is way over the 72-hour limit. But take a look at this video and you'll see the processing area. Also the pods where these children and these families sleep. If you take a look closely, you'll see that the pods are divided by clear plastic sheeting. You'll see that some of the migrants are sleeping on thin mats on the floor, very close together, wrapped in mylar blankets. There's also a playpen area. This is for very, very young children who have crossed the border unaccompanied by themselves. According to Border Patrol, these children not only play there, they sleep there because they are too young to be placed in some of the other pods. Now you've got to think about this with this context. Once these children enter this facility, they do not see the light of day. There is no going outside to play until they leave the facility and enter a HHS facility with Health and Human Services. Now, according to Border Patrol, 1,200 of those children, and they showed cameras, a wall of cabinets filled with their files. They're ready to be moved out to HHS shelters, but according to Customs and Border Protection, there is no room at HHS shelters for them, and so they have to stay in these crowded facilities until they make room for them at HHS. We asked HHS about this, and they tell us that they are working aggressively to increase the number of bed space. That's why
Doc is running out. Our top story here at 6, Jacob.
Yeah, Brian and Kelsey, the executive orders say that transgender girls and women cannot participate in girls and women's sports, in K through 12 and collegiate athletics, and are putting the responsibility of making policies about transgender girls in girls' sports on the Board of Regents and Department of Education.
Toyota Financial. You gotta go to Billion Toyota. Shop Billion Toyota Sioux Falls or BillionAuto.com.
Eric, Vanessa, and Aaron. Weekday mornings on Dakota News Now.
Tonight, the emotional testimony in the trial of the former officer charged in the death of George Floyd. Day 2 of the trial, the firefighter who was at the scene testifying in tears that she was desperate to help George Floyd, but that officers would not let her. And the teen who recorded that video of Derek Chauvin kneeling on Floyd's neck also breaking down on the stand, what she says still keeps her up at night. New satellite images over a North Korean nuclear plant. The alarming thing they show and the growing pressure on President Biden. The U.S. bracing for a potential fourth COVID wave. The troubling signs, 19 states reporting a rise in hospitalizations. The new plea from the CDC director to the nation's governors. The first video from inside the Border Patrol facility, overcrowded with thousands of migrant children. The youngest separated into playpens where they also sleep. The disturbing surveillance, a 65-year-old Asian woman brutally attacked in broad daylight in New York City. No one helping her. The hunt for the suspect. The new Secret Service report finding that school shootings are preventable, the warning signs to look for, and the countdown to an opening day like no other.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. Captured on video in its entirety and seen around the world, so many of us essentially became witnesses to the death of George Floyd, but spared the trauma of actually seeing it face to face. Unlike the eyewitnesses who testified today in the murder trial of Derek Chauvin, he's the now former policeman charged with murdering Floyd. Today, the jury heard from bystanders describing what it was like to watch from just feet away as Floyd became unresponsive while under the knee of Officer Chauvin. Today, on day 2 of the trial, we heard from the underage girl who recorded the moment. That video that horrified so many of us and forced a painful reckoning. Gabe Gutierrez is in Minneapolis tonight with late developments from the trial.
On the witness stand today, Donald Williams fought back tears as he heard the 911 call he placed while George Floyd was dying.
He just pretty much just took this guy that wasn't resisting arrest. He had his knee on the dude's neck the whole time.
Williams, a bystander at the scene last May, said he studied mixed martial arts and told Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer, was placing Floyd in a kill or blood choke.
Did call the police on the police.
Right. And why did you do that?
Because I believe I witnessed a murder.
During cross-examination today, a tense exchange with Chauvin's attorney.
When you do a blood choke, what you're trained on generally is to limit the blood supply to both sides of the neck.
No, a blood choke is attack one side of the neck.
Chauvin's defense team is arguing Floyd died from underlying health conditions and drugs in his system. The next several witnesses testified off camera since they were minors at the time.
I heard George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe, please get off of me."
Darnella Frazier, now 18, shot the cell phone video that ricocheted across the world because she said what was happening to Floyd wasn't right.
It seemed like he knew it was over for him.
If not for that video, George Floyd likely wouldn't be a household name.
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad, I look at my brothers, I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they're all black. I look at how that could have been one of them. It's the nights I stayed up apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more.
Late today, a Minneapolis firefighter testified she was stopped from giving medical assistance to Floyd when she first arrived at the scene.
When you couldn't do that, how did that make you feel?
Totally distressed.
Were you frustrated?
Yes.
The defense has suggested that this was a heavy crowd of bystanders, but the prosecution argues it was a small group of people going about their daily lives, thrust into a traumatic situation.
Understandable amount of emotion there, Gabe. Thank you. Just breaking tonight, new satellite pictures raising alarms about North Korea's nuclear program after a series of recent threats and provocations. Henry Mitchell now with late details.
Kim Jong-un taking another step towards building more nuclear bombs, according to experts studying a satellite picture just taken today. The picture showing smoke rising from North Korea's main nuclear processing plant. Experts say it appears that North Korea is about to make more bombs or already has. How concerning is it?
I think it's certainly concerning when you add this on top of the speech that Kim Jong-un gave in January, where he talked about significantly augmenting their weapons capabilities, both nuclear weapons, ICBMs, and submarine-launched ballistic missiles.
Last week, North Korea tested 2 short-range ballistic missiles. President Biden said the U.S. would respond accordingly if they escalated. The UN Security Council met on that today. The president said he's prepared for some kind of diplomacy. But right now, Kim Jong-un seems more intent on seeing how far he can advance his nuclear program. Lester?
Okay, Andrea, thank you. Growing concern about a 4th wave of COVID infections. Well, 96 million have now received at least one vaccine dose. Hospitalizations are up to about 33,000 amid pleas for new restrictions. Here's Miguel Almaguer with that.
In one of the most serious signs the nation could face a 4th surge, tonight 19 states, from New York to Washington, are now reporting a rise in hospitalizations. Many of the sick are young and fueling the numbers. Infection rates growing for those under 50, including teenagers, some who now qualify for a vaccine.
It just really puts me at ease. I'm not constantly worried about getting COVID. It's helping out the whole entire nation and the whole entire world.
With most of the nation, some 30 states, still recording a rise in new cases, Michigan's hospitalization rate is rising faster than it did in the fall. In New Jersey, the governor just lifted more restrictions. But over the weekend, hospitals admitted more COVID patients than they released. New York, home again to one of the highest new case rates per capita.
We've got patients waiting in our ER for beds for a long time, and so we are not out of the woods yet.
In Florida, where the governor says he'll issue an executive order forbidding vaccine passports, the state has become a bellwether. After spring break scenes like these and rolling back nearly every restriction, cases are rising. Today, the CDC director calling governors, asking them to reinstate safety mandates.
Lifting all these restrictions, telling people not to wear masks, gathering in large crowds, that's equivalent to playing with fire.
With roughly 90% of Americans eligible for vaccinations in the next 3 weeks, a new poll finds vaccine hesitancy is declining, especially in the South and among African Americans.
SIOUX adding 8 propane buses to their fleet.
I would say it cut our fuel cost in half
The district also invested in an on-site propane fueling station, similar to a gas pump, which helps cut costs even more.
We can get direct transport loads, and then not only is it on site, saves us time, but then we probably save, I think it's around 40 cents a gallon just to have it on site.
Most importantly, these districts hope the cleaner emissions have a positive effect on students' health.
We line up after school, and in the winter, the diesel buses have to run so they stay warm. These aren't pumping out any noxious fumes while kids are around. Diesels, you can get the black cloud of smoke.
Both school districts we spoke with say that the goal is to switch over all their route buses to being powered by propane. Miranda Page, Dakota News Now.
As for the safety of propane buses, both districts say this is a proven technology. In fact, the Omaha School District currently uses several hundred propane buses in their fleet. People from across the country.
After the news summary. Gunmen in eastern Afghanistan have killed 3 women who were giving polio vaccinations. They were shot in Jalalabad. That area has seen a spike in Islamic State attacks. Afghanistan and
politically, they can use it for years to come against Republicans when it comes to an amnesty plan, which they're setting up now with allowing all of these people to stay, not giving them court dates, and having no intention of sending any of them home.
Yeah, you're so right, Katie. Well, thank you both, Katie, Carl. Meanwhile, there's outrage in San Diego tonight as parents learn teachers from the San Diego Unified School District are teaching migrant children in person, while American students in San Diego are still remote learning right now. The district says the problem is taking place during spring break, and it's giving teachers an opportunity to volunteer to teach migrant children. On the cuffs. And George Floyd may not have been able to testify on his behalf because he is gone. But we heard his voice today through the videos, which was eminently powerful. And we also heard it through the voices of those kids that testified, and it was so compelling.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's play Genevieve Hansen, because I thought her testimony was really good too. She got into a little mix-up with the judge at the end, but she was quite good. And this is Genevieve Hansen testifying today.
Do you think it would make your job fighting the fire harder if someone started yelling at you and telling you that you were doing it wrong?
I'm very confident in the training that I've been given, so I would not be concerned about somebody that was not trained to the extent I have been.
What if they started calling you names?
Like I said, I know my job, and I would be confident in doing my job, and there's nothing anybody could say that would distract me. Mark, this struck me as one of the weirdest offenses here. That the people standing there were distracting the officers from providing care to Mr. Floyd. They didn't show any. There were 3 officers holding down George Floyd. There was only 1 officer trying to control the scene, Officer Tao. So if they were so concerned about the crowd, why was it 3-1 on Mr. Floyd and not 3-1 on the crowd? Now, that to me didn't make sense. Did it make sense to you?
Didn't make sense to me at all. But it's the defense just throwing everything up against the wall, seeing what sticks. What it did display was that not only didn't the police officers live up to their duty to care for Mr. Floyd, they rejected the offer of assistance by a person who claims to be a professional healthcare person. So they are just tripling down on their negligence in this particular case, and it will really come out later on about their liability in regards to the death of Mr. Floyd. It's clear, as both sides have said, primarily the prosecutors have said, the video speaks for itself.
You know, and Katie, you know, it is very difficult to, I will say again, it is really hard to convict police officers, even when it seems like obvious that what they've done is wrong. We just had a case just this week where officers were acquitted for beating up another officer who was undercover. He was covering and videotaping at a protest, at a Black Lives Matter protest. The other officers beat him to the point where he needed surgery, and they still didn't get convicted. So it's very hard. But from what you saw today, I've never seen a case like this with this much compelling evidence from young people, from a firefighter, a professional, that was so damning. I've never seen anything like it. To you, does this seem like a sort of separate sui generis case against Mr. Chauvin?
Well, listen, we have to strap in for a long ride. This is just day 2. There's going to be a lot more witnesses. And the reason why we heard the defense focus on the crowd collectively is because they could not go after the individual witnesses today. They were minors.
they were women, they were breaking down. I mean, you couldn't do that. So what you do is you go after the collective crowd. But remember, in the opening statements for Chauvin's defense, they said, let's not make an emotional decision, right? Let's not make it an emotional decision. Let's listen to the actual evidence. And what they're going to say is they're going to wait for their day in the sun, which is going to be the medical testimony, the expert testimony from that, and the no excessive use of force. They're going to try to tell the jury, which they've already done, we need you to make a decision based on common sense, logic, and reason. That's the only thing they can do, because it is inescapable. The emotional component today was harsh. It was really hard. It was brutal to have to sit through and hear it and listen to it.
Especially with all of replaying the video as people were narrating what they saw that day. It was something else. Katie Fang, Mark Claxton, thank you both very much for your expertise. And up next on the readout, you will not go
as it was earlier today. That's good news. North winds still blowing in Rapid City 28 miles an hour, though we've seen gusts up close to 40 miles an hour, and the winds are going to continue tonight. We've seen those winds during the day today in Sioux Falls. We've had...
And all these people we're hearing from that were so upset that they were just distracting the officers. The officers couldn't do what they were supposed to do. Let me just play for you that argument.
Would you describe other people's demeanors as upset or angry?
I don't know if you've seen anybody be killed, but it's upsetting.
So again, sir, it's fair to say that you grew angrier and angrier.
No, I grew professional. I stayed in my body. You can't pay me out to be angry.
Ellie, what do you make of this strategy that they're trying to say the officers were distracted and all these people are screaming and yelling and taking video and whatnot?
This is an utterly terrible defense. It is completely unconvincing. I think it's self-defeating for the defendant. First of all, the video evidence shows this was not an unruly crowd. This was a fairly orderly crowd, and as the witnesses explained, they only got louder as the situation for George Floyd got more and more dire. And it's such a ridiculous argument. What are we to believe here? Derek Chauvin couldn't possibly do his job because he was distracted by a handful of people on the street saying things? I mean, if so, he's an absolutely atrocious police officer, and it backfired too. When the defense lawyer asked the EMT, well, what if you were trying to put out a fire and people were saying things to you? She said, wouldn't make a difference because I'd be focused on doing my job. That is called backfiring on a defense lawyer.
All right, John, Ellie, thank you both very much for your analysis tonight as this continues. And next, the long-awaited report on where the pandemic started is out formally. But, well, wait till you hear the conclusion or lack thereof. Plus,
Just 19 years earlier at Columbine High in Colorado.
She could very well have saved a number of lives, including her grandson's life.
Now a Secret Service study of 67 school attack plans that were discovered and stopped over a dozen years found that in nearly every case, the plotters, like Joshua O'Connor, gave off distinct warning signs.
They let other students know and those around them about their planning. They talked about wanting to carry out an attack, they selected dates, and so on.
Among the warning signs, the report says fascination with past violent attacks, an interest in weapons, harassing behavior, suicidal thoughts, and being bullied. The report says schools must be alert to these threats.
That should involve teachers, counselors, administrators, principals, school resource officers. Everyone has a role to play in prevention.
The Secret Service says in many cases, students actually plot their attacks for months, giving ample time to stop them if schools know what to look for. Lester?
All right, Pete Williams, thank you. Up next, keeping everyone safe as baseball begins.
I'm Greg, I'm 68 years old. I do more
24 hours ago. Meantime, here are those temperatures now. 43 in Sioux Falls, whereas yesterday around this time we were right around 80. Meanwhile, it's 35 Rapid City, 33 in Buffalo. In fact,
has led to its downfall and many other scandals, not unlike this one. But I will say this, the board of USC, I believe, agreed, and the president, I think he backed it, paying Dr. Tyndall $200,000 to leave before the case broke. And the people that were making the bad decisions, there weren't women, there weren't minorities, there weren't stakeholders, there wasn't diversity, there wasn't a voice. I think that should be examined in this case. I think it's a problem.
There's also reporting, Audrey Napziger, that he particularly singled out Asian American women. What do you know about that?
One of my dear friends is Asian American. She's a survivor. She's also one of the charged victims in the criminal case. The things that he told her the way he approached her, and he turned her race against her, because she's told me, I am not obviously Asian American, but she has told me that in her culture, they don't talk about sex. And if women were going in college to get birth control, which was one of the main reasons people saw him, they couldn't talk to their parents about it because they shouldn't even be having sex outside of marriage. So they were particularly vulnerable to him, and I think he knew that, and I think he exploited that. And that's what predators do. They pick their population and they exploit their vulnerabilities. And that's what he did here.
And given all that has happened, Audrey Nafziger, what more does USC need to do?
Well, they're going to have to diversify their board, and they need to change the makeup of the people that make the most important decisions, and they really have not done that yet. That needs to change, and it needs to change right away. USC should reveal their internal investigation. They promised to do so. They did an internal investigation, and I think that would show us all the people who knew and stood by and did nothing. And I think those people need to be held to account. That would be meaningful to me. I think it would be meaningful to all of the survivors. Other cases like this, like Larry Nassar and Penn State, other people were held to account, criminally charged, and sent to jail. And a lot of people stood by and allowed this to happen. I'd like to know who they are and why they didn't do anything.
Such a disturbing and painful story. Audrey Nafziger, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And USC is not the only major university in Los Angeles dealing with this issue. In January, UCLA reached a $73 million settlement with more than 5,000 women who were patients of a former gynecologist there, Dr. James Heaps. He faces more civil litigation, as well as over 20 criminal felony counts related to sexual conduct. Heaps has denied the allegations.
Segment, the double standard, the unequal treatment of individuals. Hunter Biden has gotten a pass time and time again from law enforcement, from what I can determine, and this is just another example of that.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I mean, how many young men have had this happen to them? They've lied on a application and they're in jail now, but Hunter Biden is not. Are federal authorities cooperating? I know you've sent the letter.
No, not really. We have a number of outstanding requests from Secret Service regarding his protectee status when his father was still vice president. He ended that protectee status of the Secret Service the day a Time magazine article came out revealing his connection with Burisma. So he supposedly ended the protection from the Secret Service, but yet a year later the Secret Service was somehow involved with him. So we've never got to the bottom of that, and we'll see whether we get to the bottom of this.
I know I want to move on from Hunter, but I can't, because I just have to ask you one more thing, because I'm one of the Americans that is still steamed that the American voters didn't have the full story about his laptop and the corruption caught on that back in 2020 before the election. Do you think we're ever going to get to the bottom of that? Do you think we'll find out who the big guy is?
I have my doubts. One of the reasons I really wanted to make sure that President Trump had a second term, we were finally getting our arms around some of this. We were able to extract some information from the agencies that were pretty well slow walking all of our requests. But I just have my doubts. I mean, obviously, our report was completely ignored by the media that's in the back pocket of the Democrats and the liberal left. This, with the new administration, I'm just afraid this is all going to be buried and goes down the black hole of history.
Right. It's sad. You were just down at the border, which is another sad thing that you just saw. Tell us.
That is a consistent law across all of our states is something with support. Obviously, the devil's in the details in terms of what's in that law, but we're proud to have automatic voter registration. Folks on parole or probation now have the right to vote in New Jersey. Now we've got in-person early voting. We want to take some more steps, as long as it didn't undermine the steps that we've either taken or want to take. Absolutely.
Let me turn to another topic while I have you here. New Jersey is having a